IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Tuesday. It is April 15th. It also means it's tax day, so hopefully everybody is all squared away and ready to go for that as well. But it is Tuesday, and this past weekend we got to watch Notre Dame's spring game, the annual Blue Gold game, the 94th edition of it. And here at Irish Breakdown over the next...
And maybe the last.
And the 94th and potentially the final Blue Gold game. Hopefully not. But moving forward here at Irish Breakdown, before we can officially put a bow on spring and really move into the bulk of the offseason here, we're going to have a lot of shows talking about what we had learned from Notre Dame spring. And this is a crucial offseason, like we had talked about before spring session started. And Notre Dame just made a national championship run. They fell short in the title game. And the 2024 roster did a lot of things that we hadn't seen at Notre Dame in quite some time. Decades. And we are going to today start out by talking about what we learned about this team throughout spring practice. And how we're going to format it today, guys, is we're going to talk through what we learned about the offense and then what we learned about the defense. Some of it might be confirmation of things that we had preconceived notions of, and others is just, we just didn't know this going into the spring.
Yeah.
And then the second part of the show today, guys, we're going to be talking through the biggest questions that we still have. And again, we're going to divvy it up between offense and defense. And as much as we would have loved it to, there are still some areas of this team that are just going to remain question marks until the offseason continues to unfold. And then at the end of it, we already put it in the chat, but we are going to have a mailbag today. So as the show is going on, any questions, comments that come to mind, be sure that you guys put that in the chat. The way to do that is put a little MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji. That lets Bryan and I know to set that question aside so we can get to it at the end of the show. But Bryan, I'm ready to get going today, man. How you doing?
I'm great, man. I mean, I'm ready to start talking Notre Dame football. It's been an interesting spring. Some things that we learned by what we've seen, some things that are things we've learned by what we've heard from different people we talk to. So I'm ready to talk about it because, and it is funny too, Travis. You always got to keep in mind sometimes on at times like this, like you think you feel really good about something coming out of the spring, and then it ends up not being as good as maybe you think it's going to be in the fall. Sometimes you come out of the spring thinking, boy, this is going to be a question mark, and then you get into the fall and it ends up being a strength. So there's always this constant evolution with this football team. And that's what I love about just building a roster is just you're always evolving and growing and developing. And sometimes you don't grow as much as you'd like to. Sometimes you grow maybe more than you thought you would. Or you say, well, I think we get here, but I'm not sure. And then you get there. So there are a lot of things that we learned about the defensive side of the ball this spring and offensive side of the ball this spring, but also some things that you look at and say, well, I'm just not quite sure where that is yet for various reasons. And so I love this kind of time of the offseason because you feel like you have a better sense of what this team is going to look like, but also a recognition that there's still at least 25 practices. Actually, there's still 2 practices left in spring, actually. And then, although I don't know that they're doing a whole lot, I mean, it's just some of the things I've heard. And then, of course, you've got summer workouts, and then there's still 25 practices left. So there's still a lot we have to learn about this team, and that's honestly the case every year. But I am excited about the things we have learned and ready to jump into it.
Well, let's get into it today, man. I love the offseason because we can start to see the building blocks start to form of, okay, we saw what we needed to see in the spring. What's that going to develop to into the summer workouts and then obviously into fall camp before we get to August 31st. So where we're going to start today, Bryan, is we're going to talk through what we learned on the offensive side of the ball. And after Notre Dame's run last year, there were some questions that we had going into the spring based on what they lost, year 2 going into Mike Denbrock. And where we're going to start today is what many believe to be the focal point of what the offense is. And that is this running back room. And Bryan, after we sat down and we got to see this team, we got to see, 2 partial practices, got to see the first couple periods, we got to see the Jersey scrimmage. And then obviously everybody got to see the Blue Gold game this past weekend. And one of our biggest takeaways from the spring, all-encompassing, is, man, this running back room has a chance to be even better than what we think that it could be, which is really, really exciting.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you watch the Blue Gold game and think about what we saw in the Blue Gold game and then say, hey, look, this isn't one of the best running back rooms of college football with just what we're seeing today. You know, like to me, you look at what we saw on Saturday, and it's one of the 5 to 8 best rooms in college football. You have Jadarian Price, who, if he's your lead back, is a 1,000+ yard back. He's a home run hitter. He's a, probably 1,100 yard back, 10+ touchdown guy. I mean, what did he run for last year? Wasn't it like
746?
And he did that on a very limited workload because he was the number 2 back, and showed some ability in some of I think of the game that Jeremiah Love got hurt against USC. And so you've got to rely on Jadarian a little bit in the second half. I think he had like less than 5 yards rushing at halftime. He ends the game with 12 carries for 111 yards, 9.3 per carry, because Jeremiah Love went down. And so he's able to step into that role. And Florida State put all their resources into shutting down Jeremiah Love, who had less than 20 yards rushing. So what does Jadarian Price do? He goes for 7 carries, 95 yards, and a touchdown, has like a 65-yard touchdown in the game. So he's a guy that is a lead back for a lot of people. And we talked about the article from ESPN where their ESPN analysts, the college football analysts, ranked, voted on the top running backs of college football. Jeremiah Love was number 1, as I think he should be. But Jadarian Price got votes, multiple votes also, for being one of the top 10. It's not the best, like 2 guys thought he was the best, but it's like you rank your top 10. I think it was top 10.
Yep.
Basically, either somebody had him 9th or a couple people had him 10th, something like that, right? Because based on how his numbers were. And they're not wrong. I mean, you could make that case that he's one of the 10 best running backs coming back in college football. Then you look at a guy like Kedron Young and how well he looked on the spring. And I'll just give y'all one little nugget that I got that I'm going to do a post-spring sort of intel report on the board. But one of the things I've heard from now, like 3 or 4 different sources about the spring, was Kedron Young, 21, was really good. Heard about a play I'll give you this little nugget. Heard about a play against, I believe it was the first team defense, if I'm understanding the story correctly, where the defensive end just had one. He was off by like just a hair, and he was critiqued for it and said, you got to be here. But that one mistake, I was told, turned into Kedron Young going on a long touchdown run. Like, just, he's been really good this spring. We know what Aeneas can do based on what he did in the playoffs. I don't really care what Aeneas Williams did this spring, because I just watched him against Penn State and Georgia and Ohio State show that he belongs on the field with those teams. Jabron Payne looked great. I mean, he looked healthy. He looked like actually, I thought he looked a little bit quicker this spring than he did prior to his knee injury. He looked really good. He's a guy that if you're a team like Indiana or like Iowa or somebody like that, you're just like, oh man, pray that kid jumps in the portal. I don't want him to jump in the portal, selfishly as a Notre Dame fan, but there's a lot of Power 4 teams that are looking at a kid like that thinking, if he jumps in the portal, we're gonna make some phone calls. And then Nolan James looked really good this spring. Also, another guy that isn't just the blue gold game where he catches a wide open screen pass. We're just talking about things that we've heard about him and what we've seen from him in drills. And you're thinking that's a top 5 to 8 running back room right there. And that's without Jeremiah Love. Now, imagine what that room looks like when you add arguably the best running back in all of college football to the equation in Jeremiah Love. And so you look at it and say, yes, the offense has got to play better. It's got to take it to another level, et cetera, et cetera. But what a foundation to build your offense around next season than a running back room that was arguably the best last year and got better, because as you said this, I believe, a week or two ago, Trev, you lose Devin Ford and you replace him with what? An older Kedron Young, a healthy Jabron Payne, and Nolan James. And you lost nobody. So you're looking at it now, Trev, and saying, boy, this running back room has a chance to be special. And we knew it was going to be good coming into the spring. I feel even better about it. So this isn't necessarily something that we learned per se, but the reason we have it here is because I if it was just confirmation, it is what we thought it was. I don't know that we learned anything. I think what we learned this spring is Notre Dame has multiple players that can take over and be the guy for this team if need be. And that makes you a really dangerous football team, because it also means you don't have to give Jeremiah Love 15 to 18 touches a game to go out and dominate people. That way you can keep him fresh. So hopefully next year you have him more fresh in the playoffs than you did this year, where he was obviously banged up and wasn't his normal self.
I know we're not supposed to take away too much from the blue gold game. You always have to look at it with a little grain of salt because it's not everything is on full display. And one of the guys that wasn't out there, obviously, was Jeremiah Love. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I knew that he wasn't out there because we cover the team and we talk about this team every single day. But if you were just a casual fan that likes to watch Notre Dame on Saturdays, you wanted to take a trip to the blue gold game, I don't know if you would have realized that Jeremiah Love was absent. I'm being 100% honest because the production was as such that it didn't look like you were missing the top guy. It didn't look like you were missing the go-to guy in that offense, and that's something that's really, really exciting. The other thing that I learned about this running back room this spring, Bryan, is they can hurt you the same way, but differently. Let me explain what that means. They all have big playability, which is really, really exciting. But Jadarian Price does it differently than what Jeremiah Love does. Aeneas Williams does it differently than what Jadarian Price does. And the list goes on and on and on. And that little nugget that you gave us about Kedron Young sounds like he also has that big playability in him, but it's going to look differently. And so what do we talk about all the time? Notre Dame continuing to diversify their roster. And we've talked about it with the receiving room a lot. You don't want 6 boundary receivers on your roster. You don't want 8 slot receivers on your roster. You want to diversify the talent that you have. And that is what Notre Dame's running back room has continued to do. And that's really, really exciting to watch because now they can just come at you in just different waves. I'm excited to see it, man.
What we also learned this spring about the running back room, and this is also something we saw in the practices, it's something we saw in the jersey scrimmage, and I haven't talked about it a lot because it's in one of those settings where it's like you're not supposed to really reveal this, but they revealed it themselves in the blue gold game on Saturday. So now we have seen them focusing a lot this spring on getting the running backs more involved in the pass game. And we saw that in the spring game. Now, all the stuff we saw in the spring game was traditional running back routes, which I think is important because we know that you can move Jeremiah Love outside, and we've seen Aeneas Williams do that. But I think an element that was missing at times last year from Notre Dame's offense, and I think there's reasons for it. We've broken it down. I don't think it was something where Mike Denbrock forgot about it because we saw Mike Denbrock use the running backs a lot at Notre Dame in 2015 out of the backfield with C.J. Prosise. But it's more so it just – the way you were defended last year, what you had at quarterback and different things, it wasn't going to be a huge part of what you're doing. They tried early in the season to do it. Remember early in the year, they kept trying to run like jet sweeps and quick swings, and it just kept getting blown up because teams had so many bodies coming downhill and in the box because they were basically saying, hey, you're going to have to beat us throwing the football, that some of that stuff wasn't really there. You were always outmanned or out leveraged. And now I believe with the different type of quarterback they're going to have. And again, this is true no matter whether it's CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, or Steve Angeli as your starting quarterback, it's going to be different. That there's clearly an emphasis on we need to make sure the backs are getting more involved and not just in a check down type of format. And so that was something good to see also from this. And what did I say, Trev? It was like, what was it, like 8 catches for 100-something yards from the running backs on Saturday in the blue gold game. So that was also something that we learned a little bit. We were hopeful for it, but we didn't know if it was definitely going to happen, and we saw it happening this spring.
Mike Denbrock's also continuing to showcase that he wants to play to the strengths of his team, and he has done that at multiple different stops. We talked about that a lot, at LSU. Had a plethora of receivers there. You found different ways to get them involved. You moved them all around. At Cincinnati, he had 2 really good tight ends offensively. They built a lot of what they did in the passing game around the tight ends. And now we're starting to see it a little bit at Notre Dame now. It's like, look, man, in the spring, receiving room, a little bit of a skeleton group based on injuries and who isn't here yet. But what do we have right now? We have 6 scholarship running backs that can all make plays for us in different ways. And so he's continuing to play into the strengths of what this offense can potentially be for this upcoming season. Another question that we got answered throughout this spring, and of course, I love talking about them. So spoiler alert, it's about tight ends. But Eli Raridan this season has a chance to be a dude. And a lot of the things that we saw from him this offseason was really, really promising. I mentioned it in a couple weeks ago in a show, just about how the further and further those knee injuries are getting in the rear view mirror for Eli, the more confident he's playing. You heard him talk about it in, post-practice press conferences. You've heard the coaches talk about him a little bit. And in the blue gold game, he got to showcase what we saw in the Jersey scrimmage was his ability after the catch. I think for the blue gold game, I think he finished with 2 catches for 29 yards. So it's not like he went out and lit the stat sheet on fire. But what we did see from him is really, really promising moving forward, Bryan. Really exciting.
Well, just more of the ability to come off the line with speed. We saw that on Saturday. And look, you don't have to only evaluate a guy when he gets the ball. You can watch a guy throughout a game and you should honestly evaluate how a guy does, even when he's not getting the ball. You see what we talked. You guys saw on Saturday kind of what we were talking about and some of the stuff that we had seen in the practices and the Jersey scrimmage and things like that, where you see that burst back. And so, what did we learn about Eli Raridon? We always thought coming out of high school he had a chance to be a really good player. I thought he's a guy that had a really high ceiling. I graded him as like a borderline top 100 kind of guy coming out of high school, but it was always about the upside, the ceiling. He had a lot to learn and he had to get stronger and all that. We also saw too, Trev, something we learned is, I guess we should say here for a second, what we learned is a guy that we thought could be good when he signed, who's had multiple before he got here, that the athleticism we saw pre-injury is still there. That's what we saw. Where I felt last year, late in the year, maybe started to see it, but really, if we're looking at it and evaluating it, the last 2 years, Eli looked really fast in the straight line, but he didn't show me a lot of. He showed me some tightness. He didn't show me like a lot of lateral quickness, a lot of really good sudden change of direction ability, which he did show in high school. And I just kind of assumed it's like, well, I didn't assume, but I wondered, like, would that athleticism we saw when he was dominating on the basketball court in high school, not just on the football field, where he was an all-state basketball player, is that overall athleticism back? We know that the speed is back. What we've seen all spring, Trev, and what we saw in the blue gold game, what we saw in the Jersey scrimmage, what we saw in practices, just watching him go through drills, is that athlete is back. And he looked healthy, and obviously you want him to be able to stay healthy, but that was huge. And then the other part about it is what has me excited, Trev, and I know this is going to be near and dear to your heart, is we've seen him blocking really well this spring also, and we saw that in the blue gold game. Now, it's just a spring game, but it's this. If you can continue doing what you did in the spring game and carry it in the fall when you had your 2 tight end sets with Kevin Bauman and Eli Raridon, I saw some really good blocking. Even on that first long run by Jadarian Price, that great double team they had on Bryce Young, and then I think it was Raridon comes off late of that double team. Late not meaning like he was late, but it was late as someone came. Their double team, and then late he comes off and just wipes out Luke Talich. And then just opens up that run lane right there for Jadarian Price. Like that was something that was missing consistently last year. Even Cooper Flanagan, who was their best blocker, was still very inconsistent in that regard last year. That looked good to see. Hopefully that continues. But as you said, Trev, if Eli Raridon could stay healthy and continue building on what we saw this spring, he's got a chance to have an outstanding final season at Notre Dame. And we were hopeful that he could do that. But I don't know that any of us knew he could still do that just because of some of the questions we had about, would he be able to return to certain form? But I thought Eli Raridon was one of the biggest takeaways for me was, oh boy, you've got some juice there. Like Mitchell Evans was a really good football player when he wanted to be. Smooth, athletic, great hands. Oh, yeah. When he wanted to be, he was really good. Eli's a different type of player. And that different type is something that intrigues me because he's a guy that I think can stretch the football field. 6'7" and fast. And so you're adding a completely different element to your offense that you want to start creeping down a little bit too much against, Notre Dame. We saw Notre Dame lining up under center. Okay, so did we talk about that before? Or did we say, hey, I'm not sure if we should talk about that from the Jersey scrimmage?
I think we said we dropped a little hint of like they're doing some different things formationally, but nothing.
You guys saw it. They were lining up under center. So we can talk about it now because they did it in the blue gold game for everybody to see. We can't get in trouble for that. It's like, that's on you guys. You put it. But they're going under center. Yeah. And one thing I love is you want to go under center and you start creeping down. All of a sudden, I got a really fast 6'7" tight end that I can run a play action look to down the field. Like, oh boy, that could open up some opportunities for Notre Dame. So seeing Eli Raridon perform the way he did was certainly something that had me excited about when when it comes to like, what did we learn about this offense? You know, I mean, we learned it's really talented in a lot of spots. We thought that they had, we knew that they had some talent at certain places, but in others, it's like, well, I hope that this guy can do this, can do that. Running back room was confirmation and even a little bit better than we thought. Tight end was like, okay, hey, I think they're going to be there. And Trev, you had mentioned when we were, talking about the show beforehand, I still think there's a lot of questions about the tight end depth chart overall. But seeing Jack Larson finish the spring the way that he did as a pass catcher and blocker was a very positive sign to see, because so establishing that depth. So he was a guy, and then Kevin Bauman performed well in the run game, and then he catches that ball down the field. He looked as healthy as he's been in several years. There's still questions about the tight end room, but we won't be talking about it in the portion of the show because we feel a whole lot better about it now than we did coming into the spring. And then you're going to get Ty Washington this summer. You're going to get James Flanagan this summer. I'm much more confident in the overall room than I was coming in, but I don't know that that's the case if Eli Raridan doesn't look like a really top-level tight end. Like, Trev, I've been here covering this team in person since 2010. In that time, I've seen some pretty good tight ends.
Yeah.
Kyle Rudolph, Tyler Eifert, Ben Koyak, Troy Nicholas, Alize Mack, all got drafted. Durham Smythe got drafted. You talk about Cole Kmet, Brock Wright, Tommy Tremble, Michael Mayer, Mitchell Evans. What I saw from number 9 this spring is if he can build on this and stay healthy, he will be in that conversation of those tight ends that are outstanding players that then go on to the NFL. And that was maybe one of the least talked about, but exciting things that we saw this spring. And it was good to see him look the way he did in the blue gold game on Saturday.
Yeah, that was fantastic. He made a play in the open field, gave a nice little stiff arm to, I believe it was Christian Gray. And it was just, to me, little shades of Cole Kmet in the open field. I'm not saying they're going to have similar seasons, but the thing that I love about Eli Raridan is that he's a very complete tight end. Sometimes you have like the pass catcher tight end, or, hey, this tight end is a blocker. Some of the names that you listed out of all of the illustrious tight ends that have gone through Notre Dame's program, some of them you can kind of file under specific categories. Eli Raridan has a potential where he can kind of put his name in both buckets, which is really exciting. But I agree with you. Absolutely. The depth is in a better spot than what we had perceived it to be, say, on March 1st. Mm-hmm. And it's a long way from being complete. And there's some things that we're going to have to see, throughout the summer and heading into fall camp. Health being the biggest question, especially with the people remaining in the room. Eli Raridan has to stay healthy. Kevin Bauman has to stay healthy. Because if something happens to either of them, tight end then jumps to probably the top of my list of question marks on the offensive side of the ball once again. But in the next 60 days, Notre Dame's tight end room is going to look a lot different. If those guys can remain healthy and Ty Washington comes in and James Flanagan comes in and they're who we perceive them to be, Notre Dame's tight end room looks a lot better than what we had thought about at the start of spring. One of the last things that we had talked about on offense that we got answered, and it was a general hypothesis at the start of the season that, look, Notre Dame's quarterback room is loaded with talent. And I think as the spring has unfolded, we have seen that. And we have seen that come to fruition, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Quarterback is going to be the one position group on either side of the ball that we're going to talk about twice. Because we're going to talk about it here, and we're going to talk about it in the questions segment as well. We thought that the room was talented coming in. Right? I mean, we had seen some things, but we wondered, could this group kind of rise to the occasion? Like, look, CJ and Kenny Minchie last spring, there was zero pressure on them last spring. Zero. They both knew they had no shot to be the starting quarterback last spring. So, okay, great. You come out in the spring and you play well and you look loose and you have a nice period and you show off arm talent. You look really great in drills, but there's no pressure on you at all to go out there and perform because you're not going to be a starting quarterback. It's going to be Riley Leonard once he gets back from injury. And if for some reason he can't go, it was very obvious that the Notre Dame coaching staff it was very clear that Steve Angeli was going to be the backup quarterback. So you come and say, okay, that's great, but can they play like that when there's pressure on them because they're battling for the starting job? Could they do it then? Could Steve Angeli perform in a way that you look at and say, okay, well, yeah, it was easy for him to kind of be the guy last spring because he knew once Riley Leonard showed back up, he wasn't going to be the quarterback. But now he's battling for the starting quarterback job. And while there still are big questions remaining, which we'll get into in the section 3 of today's show, the encouraging thing is all of them, I thought, raised their level of play. And Sean Davis and I talked yesterday, Trev, and I know you watched the show where we said, look, it's very clear to us that the two younger quarterbacks, Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr, are significantly ahead of Steve Angeli when it comes to just the ability to just lead the offense and be dominant football players. But even then, even within that doesn't mean Steve Angeli regressed, because he didn't. It doesn't mean Steve Angeli is some no-talent bum, because he's definitely not. And so everything that we thought about these young men got confirmed this spring. And that's a really good place to be if you talk about the quarterback room. And the one thing that we definitely learned is Blake Hebert's got a lot of arm talent. So it before it was like, well, these are the three. But now it's like, well, these are the three, but that number 12 over there, he's going to have his chance to be something at Notre Dame some point in time down the road as well. So not that he's in the conversation to start, because he isn't, but it's more so just looking at the room as a whole. There's a lot of talent there. I mean, I look at it like this, Trev, and I don't think it's true for 2025 because Blake Hebert's a true freshman and he's got a lot to learn. But you've got 4 kids in that room that can be Power 5 or Power 4 starting quarterbacks someday on pretty darn good football teams. And I think there's a hierarchy as far as how far they can take certain teams and what level of Power 4 they can all play at. But those are all really good football players. And I thought they all rose to the occasion this spring and put their best foot forward. I don't think Steve Angeli really has any chance to start right now. But I thought Steve Angeli put his best foot forward this spring and showed some good things and battled and competed. I think Kenny Minchey did the same thing, and I think CJ Carr did the same thing. All of them have things to improve upon. And we'll get to that at some point in time this offseason, as well as we'll kind of break down each quarterback and what we need to see. But they all stepped up and performed. And so you feel while I still have some anxiousness, I guess, when it comes to who are they going to pick as the starter, my overall level of confidence that they're going to be okay rose this spring because of us getting out there and learning how these players are going to perform when the lights are bright, because they are brighter on them this spring because they do have the burden of, okay, do you want to start or not? Which none of them had on them last spring. There was nobody in the room last spring that you looked at and said, hey, you're battling to start at quarterback. Look, they all knew that when Riley Leonard got back, he was going to be the starter. And Marcus Freeman's staff didn't really hide it. They left enough of an opening there in case Riley wasn't healthy, but they didn't exactly hide the fact that when he got back that Riley Leonard was going to be the starting quarterback. And this spring was a complete opposite. They all had pressure on them. And I thought they all handled it well and put their best foot forward in this quarterback battle. And when you can walk away from the spring knowing that, Trev, then you can feel good about, okay, once a winner is decided, this position should be in good hands this season, which is important for the Notre Dame offense. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, man. I mean, Notre Dame's quarterback room is in a really good spot. And we've talked a lot about what any of those kids could go do at a different school. I mean, heck, at Notre Dame, you have 3 guys on the roster right now that can lead your team back to the playoffs. I can't tell you the last time that Notre Dame has been in a spot where they could go with option 1, 2, or 3, and it all results in them playing in the college football playoffs.
Sure.
Different years, right? Because, previously it was a 14 playoff. Now that it's a 12-team playoff.
Sure.
But Notre Dame is now tasked with who can take us the farthest once we get there, not who can get us there. And that's a really good spot to be in, but also why it is in our questions, which we will get to later in the show.
Yeah. And Trev, I think there was a couple other things I want to mention before we move on to the defense. I think there were some other things that I don't know that are things that we learned, but I do think there's some things that we had confirmed this spring at different times. I think we have it confirmed that, Jaden Greathouse is still really good. There was no step back from Jaden Greathouse. We learned that the freshman class of receivers is maybe a little better than we think it is. We'll talk more about that in the question section, but that gives you some hope for the future. I don't know how much that class is going to impact this in 2025. I think something we learned. I think we learned that the receiver room obviously landed a couple transfers. We didn't get to see one. The other we weren't sure of. And honestly, coming out of the Jersey scrimmage, I didn't know what Notre Dame had in Will Pauling. And he goes out there in the Jersey scrimmage or in the blue gold game and he catches, I think, 0 passes. But you know what I learned in that game? This guy's got a lot more vertical speed than he showed at Wisconsin when you look at his release off some of those routes, and so when you look at all those things, Trev, there's other things we learned to varying degrees. You could even talk about the offensive line. We learned that certain guys are going to do this and that. But I think the three that we talked about at the top, running back room, Eli Raridan, and the tight end room as a whole, and then the talent of the quarterback room are all things that we learned and all takeaways we can have to say, hey, look, we still have questions about all these things, even running back. Okay, we know it's talented, but who's going to do what? What's after Jeremiah Love, kind of what's the pecking order? I mean, I still think it's Love and Price, but then who's going to be on there third and short? Is it going to be normal? Is it going to be, is Jeremiah Love going to play more on third down, or is it going to be Aeneas Williams? Is it going to be Jabron Payne? Like, what's the role for all these guys? We don't know the answer to that, but we know it's like kind of like, well, I don't really care because whoever's going to fill whatever role is going to be a really talented running back. And so those are things that we all took away, but we certainly learned a lot about the offense this spring. We also learned, I think, another final piece to this before we move on to the defense, Trev, is we did learn that this offense looks a lot different and pretty potentially dangerous with a drop back quarterback behind center. I think that's the final thing for me is there's this notion that Mike Denbrock needs a mobile quarterback in his offense. And I would say, well, I don't think he needs it any more than any other coach needs it. It's more of a want. I would like a guy that's athletic and can make plays with his legs. But the number one want that Mike Denbrock desires for his offense is he wants guys can drop back and sling the ball all over the field. And I think that was confirmed in some of the practices we saw to a degree, but you don't really know until you get into more game situations. We saw that in the Jersey scrimmage on Saturday where they were more than willing to throw the ball down the field. But, of course, we saw it even more so in the spring game. Kenny's throwing bombs down the field. He throws a post. He throws a slot fade. Steve's throwing balls down the field. He didn't hit any, but he was taking the shots. CJ obviously had a lot of success throwing the ball down the field. It was a much more aggressive pass game. We saw some of the same plays we saw last year. We saw some things in the spring practices that were new that they didn't show us in the blue gold game, so we won't get into those. But we also learned that Mike Denbrock knows he understands where this offense is going because he's the one he's the architect of it. And we learned that when he has this type of quarterback in his room, that he can easily adapt. And we saw a much different looking offense, in my opinion, on Saturday than we did last year. That's not better, not worse. It's just different. And that's something else that we learned.
All right, Bryan, let's talk some defense, man. And let's talk about similar conversation to what we had on the offensive side of what we learned about this group. And heading into the offseason, there was a lot of chatter about this unit. Al Golden's gone. They hired a new defensive coordinator in Chris Ash. Xavier Watts is gone. Ben Morrison's gone. Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Jack Kaiser. We've highlighted a lot about the leadership and the experience that was lost on this side of the ball. And where we're going to start today with this conversation is what has kind of been the strength of this team the last couple of years, and it's the secondary. And we're going to break down about what we learned about this team. And look, man, there's no other way to say it. Simply is the secondary, once again, is going to be really, really special in 2025.
I think the only question about the secondary at this point in time is, will it be better than last year? I think that's really the only question that I have. And when you watch Leonard Moore, he's Leonard Moore. There was no fluke. You could say, like, okay, if let's say Benjamin Morrison got hurt against USC And then the last 4 games, Leonard Moore steps in and he plays really well. And you're like, wow, that's pretty good. You could look back and say, well, look, teams didn't really know about him. They didn't quite know how to go at him. They weren't able to find his weaknesses. The kid played 10 games. By the time they got to the playoffs, those opponents knew exactly who Leonard Moore was and whether or not you could or couldn't go at him. And I think that the playoff was also a great opportunity because he realized that his game still needs work. You think of the play he got beat against Georgia on that sideline route, and you're fortunate that the guy stepped out of bounds because Leonard didn't play that well, and the guy was able to beat him for a play. You think of the 3rd down on opening drive, against Jeremiah Smith, where Jeremiah was able to kind of push off on Leonard, and it was a push off, but if you don't play it better, you're not going to get that call. That's a lesson learned, and he'll play it better next time. And then, also Jeremiah still caught the ball short of the sticks. You got to learn to, attack in a way to maybe bring him down. I mean, there's a level of play that Leonard Moore can still get to, which is not at all a criticism. It's exciting to think about the fact that kid has not reached his full potential. And we saw a little bit, he looked stronger he looked thicker this summer, or this spring, I should say. Clearly the weight room is good to him. He looked every bit as explosive as he did the spring. Watching him go through drills, there was no just going through the motions of a guy that realizes he's arrived and he's an All-American now. It looked like a guy was out there putting in work. And then obviously I thought he performed well in the blue gold game again. So, Christian Gray, I don't know that we're going to really learn a lot about him till we get to the season, but he was out there putting in work. He looked good. Carson Hobbs was a guy that caught our eye in some different drill periods. I thought he looked he was okay in the Jersey scrimmage. It looked like he was a guy that was kind of maybe hadn't gotten a ton of nickel work up to that point in time. He just looked a little not always. But by the time you get to the spring game a week later, he looks like he's been playing it ball for a year. Looked really comfortable, and then he's also playing outside. He made a lot of plays, had some breakups, should have had a pick in the end zone. He was all over guys. I mean, the only time he got beat was a play that's a tough ask for anybody to defend Jaden Greathouse going in motion, running a reverse pivot on 3rd down. I mean, that's going to be hard on anybody to handle that route. But outside of that, I thought he played really good football. You talk about what you learned. I learned that the depth chart at Notre Dame is a whole lot better at cornerback than we thought about coming in, because coming in, we knew what Leonard and Christian were, but we weren't sure. I gave Carson Hobbs, I believe, I have to look it up. I believe I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade, but he was a kid that I thought was really raw. He had a lot to work on, a lot to improve upon, but you could see the speed, you could see the natural strength and the different skills. And the fact is Mike Mickens wanted him. And so you just kind of assume there's some talent to work with. Well, we started to see that upside start to become reality this spring, to the point where I would argue, I feel confident that if something were to happen to one of the starters, that you at least have one guy that you can feel pretty good about throwing in there and can help you. And because they did so much cross training with him, he's not just like a field guy. And he can play different spots, like we saw with Leonard Moore last year, who started his first career start was at field corner, not boundary. And that was in place of Christian Gray. And then obviously you have Benjamin Morrison go down and Leonard Moore steps over there. So feel a lot better about that. Saw some really good stuff from Cree Thomas this spring as well. I thought he was going to be a good player at Notre Dame. I thought he had talent. I graded him as a top 150 player with 4.5-star upside grade, which is that of a top 50 player at the time. I've altered my grades a little bit and critiqued it a tad, but at the time, as the upside of a top 50 player, you saw those flashes this spring. Good size, he's fluid, he's smooth, he's got some speed. He's still a work in progress, more so than Carson Hobbs, because he's going through his first spring. Carson's a year ahead, but I don't think Carson was an early enrollee last year. I'd have to go back and look at that, but I don't think so. What we saw in the fall, I believe, was Carson's first chance there, and then obviously we saw his development throughout the year. And then now we've seen him take a great jump here just going into his I think it'd be redshirt freshman year, because I don't think he played more than 4 games last year in the regular season. So feel great about that. And then you've still have Dallas Golden coming in this summer. You've got Mark Zachary coming in this summer. You've got Chance Tucker still expected to be back from his injury. And I have to admit, Trev, I feel a whole lot better about Mark Zachary now than I did before. He actually kind of became one of my new favorite players at Notre Dame, and I'm going to show you why right here. You all are going to love. Anyone my age is going to love this. You younger people may not appreciate this, But old heads like me, this is why Mark Zachary is now one of my favorite players at Notre Dame. My dude is rocking a starter jacket for the blue gold game. My wife took that photo from the game. My man is rocking a starter jacket. So I'm like, all right, Mark Zachary just jumped up in my list of favorite players. And I already had him as a top 100 recruit anyway. But you're getting a guy like him, and you're getting Dallas Golden to show up, this summer. I feel so much better about the cornerback room behind the starters than we did coming in. That alone makes you be like, okay, this secondary is still going to be really good. But what truly, Trev, got us feeling great about the secondary, and I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about this because I've already gone off on it in past shows, seeing the work we saw at safety all spring and then especially in the blue gold game, and we didn't even get to see Jadon Blair in the blue gold game. And let me tell you, folks, I have talked to multiple sources around the program. I'll give you another little nugget that's going to be part of a much longer intel piece after the spring. Jadon Blair was everything they thought he was going to be and more this spring. Like, he was really good. He had a minor little tweak of his ankle. If it was a game day, he could have played. I saw him running around before the game. He looked fine. He wanted to play. They wouldn't let him because there's no need to take that risk. You throw him. You've got Bronte Johnson. Kennedy Urlacher's looked really good this spring. Adon Schuler's Adon Schuler. And Luke Talich is – we've said this all spring, Trev. He's had a very good spring, and you all saw it on Saturday at the Blue Gold game. Luke Talich was all over the field. You're not going to have Xavier Watts, so you're not going to have anyone that's as good as Xavier Watts. But top to bottom, it's such a longer, more talented room, Trev. That ultimately is what has us fired up about what this room could be. I said, I'm going to let you talk about it. Then I went and talked about it. That just tells you how excited I am about this room.
No,
I'm
man,
you talk about it, Trevor, and then 5 minutes later, it's like, okay, your turn. Sorry, man.
No, man, you're good. It's exciting stuff. And look, we could have a whole show dedicated to just talking about the safety room, if we're being honest. There's no shortage of discussion with that group. But that was, outside of Al Golden's departure, the biggest topic of the offseason for the defense was arguably, what do they do without Xavier Watts? And we've been saying it now for the past couple months. You're not going to ask any one of those kids that we just listed off to go be Xavier Watts. It's an impossible task, truly, especially this season with how inexperienced they are versus – now, look, we can have these conversations all the live long day in 2026, depending on how this stuff unfolds. But for now, current state of that room, you can't ask anybody to go be Xavier Watts, not even Adon Schuler, who started alongside of him for 16 games. But what we did learn is that this room is as long and fast and as athletic as what the roster reads off. There's not a lot of safety rooms in college football, and I don't know if there are any safety rooms in college football that can say their safety room goes 6'5", 6'4", 6'3", 6'3", 6'2", of guys battling for a starting spot. No, by the way, we haven't seen Jalen Stroman play one down of ball yet because he's coming back from injury, and he's the most experienced one of the group. We're talking about a safety room where the highest ceiling kid is the youngest in Jadon Blair. He's also the tallest, and so when you sit down and you think about what this room could be this year, again, we've talked about it a lot with different position groups. Notre Dame continues to diversify the talent and the skill sets that they have in those rooms. And not everybody does it the same way. Luke Talich just talked about before, look, man, we played a different style of football when I was in high school. My job was to scream downhill, come and fill the alley, blow up plays. And I think we've seen that. We saw that in the blue gold game. We've seen that in the Jersey scrimmage. We saw that last year on special teams. But now we're starting to see the coverage aspect of his game and Kennedy Urlacher's game come alive. Kennedy Urlacher was a guy that stuck out to me in the first practice we got to go see because he's just a lot more clear with what he's doing. And now the speed and the intensity that he plays with is really starting to shine. Tate Johnson is somebody that we walked away, Brian, from the Jersey scrimmage. We're like, yo, dude, like Tate Johnson's want to stick his nose in there. He's going to coming down and making plays behind the line of scrimmage. We know what he can do from a coverage aspect. I mean, he was good enough in coverage that they asked him to back up Leonard Moore last season at corner, and so thankfully Leonard Moore didn't get hurt. But if they did, Tate Johnson was going to step in there also as a true freshman and play cornerback for Notre Dame in the playoffs. So this room is loaded, absolutely loaded with talent. And we haven't even got to see Jalen Stroman yet in the blue and gold, which is really, really exciting. But, man, this room, that's something that I learned, is that the talent, everything about this room is as advertised, and exciting to continue to talk about him this offseason.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that while there's still plenty that they have to learn and improve and those type of things, and this is a unit that's going to make more mistakes than it did last year because it's going to be a much younger unit, that I view it as being one. It's kind of like how we talked about linebackers. How I felt like, linebackers are going to make more plays this year. They may make more mistakes, but they're going to make more plays looking at the 2024 linebackers. And I feel even more so about the secondary, that they're going to make fewer mistakes than linebackers, make more plays. But you're going to see times where, a safety's not going to read a reverse as well as Xavier Watts did. And it's going to result in maybe a big play. But there's also going to be times where you're like, you thought you could get that ball in there and you realized, well, Xavier Watts not back there anymore. And then you realize, no, he's not, but that 6'5" or 6'4", or, whatever other player, that Virginia Tech transfer who's a really good football player is there, and he's going to go make a play on you. And you feel, okay, this unit should be good. And we talked about on offense, you've got a foundational unit to build around. We did a sort of a ranking of the position groups coming into this, before the spring game. And we did that before the spring game for a reason, kind of looking at it because we want to say, okay, how do we feel differently coming out whenever we do sort of a pre-fall camp ranking, or if we do a post-spring ranking, which we may do. Safety is going to be, and corner is going to be a little higher on the board, and just secondary as a whole is going to be higher on the board. This is absolutely a foundational position. You can say that's an elite position group that's arguably the best in the country that you're going to build your team around. And how often can you look back in the history of Notre Dame of our lifetimes and say, for one season, Notre Dame had the best secondary in college football, much less for 3 years in a row they've had one of the best secondaries in football, especially the last two. I think the 23 secondary was driven by, you had 2 stud corners and a really good safety, but there were still some question marks, at the other safety spot. Depth at corner was a little shaky with some young players and some injuries, but last year I thought it was really good. But depth at safety was a bit of a question mark beyond the top 2 because of some youth and injuries, and then injuries at corner, and then Jaden Mickey leaves, which means you had to take one of your talented freshman safeties and move him to corner, and there were a lot of different issues there. Now you look at it and say, for 2 years in a row, Notre Dame's going to have arguably the best secondary in college football. And I don't know anyone with a brain or without bias that's going to argue against that. I mean, Greg McElroy made that case last summer before that about last year's secondary. And I expect this year's secondary to be just as good, if not better. It'll be different, but just as good, if not better. And we haven't even talked about how good Devontae Smith played in limited snaps, how effectively Carson Hobbs not only played at corner, but played in the nickel. And I thought Ben Minnick looked really good playing in the nickel as well. Not just the interception. I mean, take the interception away and just evaluate his play on everything else. I thought he looked good outside of the interception. And what I mean is Trev, instead of say, well, he didn't do anything on the interception. No, I'm just saying, like, of course, when a guy has a big play, you look and say, oh, great job. But people can often mistake a great play for a great overall performance. What I'm making the point is, even if you remove that one play and just evaluate everything else, I thought Ben Minnick graded out really well, even outside of that interception. Then when you throw the interception in, you're like, dude, that was a really strong performance. And so I just feel the depth, they have starting caliber players in the 2 deep across the board in the secondary. And there's just not a lot of teams that can do that, can say that. So I think the biggest thing we learned is this secondary is not going to miss a beat, and it's even deeper than it's been in past years. And it's not just because of the 6 early. We didn't talk about Ethan Long. I thought he looked pretty good this spring. Brandon Logan shows up this summer. Jalen Stroman's not here yet. Dallas Golden's not here yet. Cree Thomas isn't here yet. We didn't see Jadon Blair in the blue gold game, and the secondary still played really well. So it's a pretty tremendous foundation to build your room around. And then the next one, Trev, is the linebacker room's not going to take a step back. I mean, we learned that. And I think it was a question. We thought that it could be good, but it was still you got to prove it, that you remove a 6th-year senior, a 4-year starter at linebacker, a team captain and a guy that's going to be an NFL draft pick, had really good testing numbers. You take that out of the lineup, are they going to be able to just replace and reload? We thought so, but we didn't know for sure after what we saw this spring, Trev. I'm very confident this linebacker room is not only going to be able to overcome the loss of Jack Kaiser, I think just the overall unit growth and maturity from where it was last year, I expect this linebacker room to be even better.
I look at this linebacker room very similar to how I look at the running back room, which kind of coincides with the rankings, the pre-blue gold game rankings that you and I had came out with a couple weeks ago. Look, man, I didn't learn anything new about the linebacker room. It did confirm a lot of things for me. You know, we had a lot of thoughts about what this room could be and what it could potentially look like, you know, going into a lot of these players' second year starting and getting second year starting snaps. You know, you mentioned about how the 2 deep at corner has starters all across the board. I mean, you could make the argument that the 3 deep at linebacker has starters across the board, depending on what personnel grouping you roll out there. You know, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, you know, the Drake Bowens, the Jalen Sneeds, like people at this point in their career, you would expect to continue to take that next step. From everything that I had heard from press conferences, it does sound like Drake Bowen is taking that next step as that vocal leader, not just in the linebacking room, but of the defense as a whole, which kind of aligns with him being the, you know, the Mike linebacker and kind of confirms some of the things that we started to see towards the end of the season. But for me, man, it's, you know, paying attention to a lot of the young players. Kingston Viliamasa took that next step. You know, he looks like he's playing with a lot more clarity. He, you know, dropped a little bit of weight, did not sacrifice anything with his playmaking ability, his ability to take on blocks, you know, block destruction, blow up plays in and around the line of scrimmage. You know, Bodie Cahoon, you know, they mentioned that he was the most athletic linebacker in that room. And at moments this spring that flashed and you could see it.
Certainly did in the blue gold game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, even a guy with Madden Faremo, we talked about him after the blue gold game. He is still trying to figure out, you know, which way's north and south, but he does everything at 100 miles an hour. And on the moments where he does get it right, oh, it flashes. I mean, Madden Faremo is going to play snaps for Notre Dame this fall, whether it's on defense, special teams, but be on the lookout for number 19, man. He's going to be blowing up some plays and he's going to be really, really fun to watch. But yeah, this linebacker room, Notre Dame's defense is in a really good spot when we're talking about how their secondary has the potential to be the best secondary in college football 3 years in a row, 2 years in a row. And we also believe that the linebacker room also has the potential to be the best linebacking unit in the country. And so this defense is really, really poised to have a good year. And it's going to be centered around kind of the back half of it. Not to say that the D-line, which we're getting ready to talk about, is not in a good spot also. But, man, these linebackers, again, another position group that we could do a whole show on, man.
You know, we were talking about all those DB players, and honestly, I completely forgot to mention Tabron Benny-Powell, who I thought looked solid in the blue gold game as well. So somebody in the chat mentioned him. I think it was Jason Smith mentioned Tabron Benny-Powell after we'd started playing linebacker, and I was like, yep, gotta, you know, shouldn't have left him out. Yeah, Jason said that one. But yeah, he flashed as well. Now this is a talented room, Trev. I need to see Jalen Seed continue his spring growth into the fall. I mean, with Jalen, I'm in sort of a cautiously optimistic with his spring performance. You know, in the blue gold game, we still saw a couple times where it's like he was a little out of control. I think first play of the game, he fills the hole, and Jadarian just kind of makes a miss, and he misses the tackle, and Jadarian runs for 9 yards. Like, that's a play you got to blow up at the line of scrimmage. Like, you're there. You're the will linebacker. You read it perfectly. You got in the hole, and then you were out of control, and a good running back made you miss. Can't make those misses. Now, in a positive note, there's not a whole lot of running backs he's going to face as good as Jadarian Price, but he will when you get to the postseason. He will against, I don't want to say they're as good as Jadarian Price, but A&M's got some good running backs. Miami's got some solid running backs. I mean, there are some teams that Desmond Reed, I mean, that's a guy that can make you miss in a hole. For Pitt, is a good running back. I'm not saying they're as good as Jadarian, but you get the point. Their guys can make you miss. It's those type of things I just need to see him eliminate a little bit more. If a player that was known as a sound player would have made that play, I probably would brush it off. But I will admit, because that's been an issue for Jalen, it does kind of like, but what you can see is he's bigger, he's thicker, he's still explosive. He had a really nice, him and Drake Bone had a really nice pass rush stunt in the Jersey scrimmage, which Drake blew up a guard, and then Jalen was able to come around and get to the quarterback. And I don't think did they call it a sack? I don't think they called it a sack, but Steve, I think it ended up with a throwaway by Steve Angeli. So I think the talent there is really good. And you mentioned, Trev, I mean, we didn't see Teddy Rizak on Saturday. You know, I didn't notice much from Jaden Osborne. I know he played, but you know, we've seen him perform very well at different periods of time in the spring. This room is really, really loaded, really loaded. And in another position group that you look at and say, this has a chance to be one of the best. And I had somebody, was it Sean or was it somebody said to me, you can make a case that Notre Dame has the best back seven in college football for 2025. I think it's debatable. I think there's other units that are in the conversation, but flat out, Notre Dame is in that conversation. Flat out. And so it's a great place to build around. And they had Preston Zinner playing up on the edge, and he gets a couple pressures. I mean, he killed the second drive of the game. He killed it. Yep. He had, on third down, he blew it up and forced Kenny to scramble. And then on fourth down, he sacks Kenny and, you know, drives over. So we didn't see much of him at linebacker, but he sure looked good. Oh, and by the way, one of the best players from last year's Jersey spring game, Kahano Kia, didn't practice either, and he'll be back for the fall. So incredibly deep room, talented room, athletic room, and a room that I think they made steps this spring. There's still work to be done from a discipline, assignment, correctness standpoint, but just an outstanding room, Trev.
A lot deeper than a lot of other linebacking rooms in the country. And kind of sticking along that common theme, another thing that we got answered for us this spring, Bryan, was the interior of the defensive line, which that was another hot topic of discussion. What was it going to look like without Riley Mills and Howard Cross? You know, we saw the toll that injuries and other factors, you know, speaking to Jason Onye, not being a part of the team. And we saw kind of what the causality of that was as the playoffs started to unfold. One thing that I learned this spring, and it sounds like I'm not alone with it, you know, kind of also following in line with Chris Ash and what he said in one of his first press conferences in the spring, is, man, that defensive tackle unit is a lot deeper than what we thought. I mentioned it in the post-game show from the Blue Gold game is, look, man, this unit can come at you in waves. And we saw that in the Blue Gold game. And that was without Brennan Vernon even playing, who was starting to see some decent minutes. We saw him do some good things in the Jersey scrimmage. You know, we saw him in the rotation a little bit in some of the other practices that we had. But, man, this unit can come at you in waves. And one of the things that we learned is it's a lot deeper than what we thought heading into spring.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it's fair to say that this position group as a whole was arguably the biggest question mark on the entire team, if not definitely on defense, but if not the entire team? As far as just, I don't know if it's going to be good or not. I mean, it should be, but like we really don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I thought Gabe Rubio had a solid spring. I thought Jason Onye was outstanding. Armel Mukum looked really good all spring. I've talked to different sources about him. He's a guy that's performed well. Hadn't seen a whole lot from Jared Dawson in the first 3 times we saw him. Didn't see him much in the Jersey scrimmage. Didn't see him, you know, he was there going through drills. Didn't see a whole lot. And then he comes out in the scrimmage and was constantly in the backfield. He was number 93. He was constantly in the backfield. Elijah Hughes is a solid player. Sean Sevillano did some nice things, really anchoring in the middle of the line. You mentioned Brennan Vernon. We did see some nice things from him in the Jersey scrimmage. He hurt his knee, as Marcus Freeman said. There was some early concern that was a much more serious injury, like maybe multiple, but it ended up being like not as major. He'll be back for fall camp. He's a guy that had performed well. And, you know, so I just – and I'll say this. I think what we saw from the spring hopefully convinces the staff to leave Cole Mullins at defensive end, because he looked pretty good at defensive end. You know what I mean? Like really good in the Jersey scrimmage. I think that allows you to say, okay, you've got the depth here now that you don't necessarily need. There's no reason to move him back. And and it's much bigger than they've been. Now, their play needs to get better. We saw that there wasn't the consistency from the D tackle position in the blue gold game. So we're not sitting there saying like this is going to be the best D tackle rotation in the nation. Like we're not on the homer train today, right? I mean, we believe the things we believe about the secondary linebackers because they've proven it, they've shown it. It's just kind of, it's not really a hot take. It's just kind of, how do you not think that? The D tackle room is a little bit more of a, okay, I'm very encouraged by where we are now compared to what the question marks were before the spring. Coming into the spring, we weren't even sure if Jason Onye was what he was going to do. And he still had a lot to prove to the team and the coaches and stuff like that to say, hey, look, I'm back in good standing. So that was great to see. And obviously, Jared Dawson, how would he fit in the system? And there was a lot of questions. The unit still has to get better. It is not a finished product by any stretch. And if you're going to say of all the groups that didn't have a bunch of dudes out because of injury, who performed the most inconsistently, I'd say it was D tackle from what we saw. Even in the blue gold game, there were some hey, you got to get off that block and get into that gap and things like that. But much more progress, and I feel much better about it now. Like if they just play like they do now, that's a good unit. But I think if they can be more consistent and a little bit more disruptive, that it can go beyond just a good unit and be a really good unit. Still work to be done to get there. But when you talk about what we learned that this D tackle group is going to be okay. They're going to be good. And by the way, we didn't see Donovan Heinisch in the last two scrimmages either. And we know what he can do. We've seen him do it. So you feel really good about the potential of that group. And I don't even call it potential. It potentially could get a lot better, but just the present where it is good. It's good. And I don't know that I felt that coming into the spring. I was hopeful, but I don't know that we could sit there and say, oh yeah, they're good. They're going to be fine. It was, if this guy steps up, then they're going to be fine. Well, then we saw it. We saw them do that this spring. So I'm very encouraged by that. Were there any other things, Trev? Maybe not some of the big things we learned, but there were any other kind of little micro things that you felt good about that you say, hey, look, I learned this about this unit throughout the spring on defense?
Yeah, we touched on some a little bit, but one, the D line, especially along the interior, is just significantly bigger across the board than what it was last year. Now, obviously, it's tough to say that when you lose a guy like Riley Mills, but I mean, from a weight standpoint, from a height standpoint, and you can just look at them and see that they are visibly bigger along the interior. That was big for me. Cole Mullins playing end looks a lot more natural there, man. I mean, I was happy to see that this spring and him make an impact in the blue gold game. But the defense as a whole, another thing, big picture that was kind of confirmed, and it was confirmed in the practices that we saw, the press conferences that we got to listen to. When Chris Ash came in and during his opening press conference, there was a lot of debate going around some of the things that he said about, this isn't my defense, it's Notre Dame's defense. And, you got to look in between the lines at some of those things. But one thing that was confirmed for me is that he didn't come in and completely turn this on its head and say, nope, this is going to be my playbook and we're going to do the things my way. It reinforced what some of his past players have said about him, of that, look, it's a really easy defense to understand. He wants everybody to be clear in their jobs, to be able to play the fastest that they possibly can. And I think we got to see a lot of that this spring. Got to see some different wrinkles, of course, because it is his defense. He can't come in and be Al Golden. But that was something that was confirmed for me as well. Big picture, not just about one position group specifically, but at its core, you still got to see the impact of Max Bulla, Al Washington, and Mike Mickens, and some of Marty Biaggi as well. But overall, man, this defense is in a really good spot moving into the offseason. And so it's a group for me that one of the bigger questions that we had is, can they maintain that level of where they were at? Again, we're not going to know definitively until August 31st. And then we're kind of evaluating it as each Saturday progresses. But I think they're in a really good spot to kind of pick up where they left off, despite losing a lot of experience and leadership on the defensive side of the ball. So those for me are kind of my big picture takeaways from the defense. But I say all that to say this is a really talented group. And it would not shock me if at the end of the season we're talking about in that weird gap between the final regular season game and the first playoff game. Yo, man, like Notre Dame secondary, I think it's the best in the country. Yo, this linebacker room, I think it's one of the best in the country. That's a really, really good spot to be in. Bryan, what about you? Anything else to add on the defensive side?
No, you nailed it, man. I think I don't know that we learned that this is a really deep athletic defense. We had it confirmed that it was a long, deep athletic defense that can really run. And yeah. So I feel good about where they are, no doubt.
Love it. Well, all right, folks, we are getting ready to move on to the second part of this show where we are going to talk about some of the questions that we do still have about this team heading out of the spring. But before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And whatever platform you are watching this on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan. In part 2 of today's show, we are going to talk about the biggest questions that we still have. And we're going to stick with the same format that we did in the first part of the show. We're going to start with the offense and we're going to move to the defense. And some of them are kind of the no-brainer questions. We still don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be. That's obviously a question that we're going to have, but some of them are some of the more fine-tuned details. And some of it is just kind of out of the control of nobody. There's players that still need to arrive on campus. There's players that have to come back healthy, but that doesn't make them not a question mark moving forward. And ideally, it's going to be answers that we get as the summer goes on and the team gets into fall camp. But where we're going to start today is on the offensive side of the ball, Bryan. And the biggest question that we have, one of the biggest questions that we have, it's plain and simple, is who's going to start at quarterback and what happens to that depth chart?
I'm comfortable saying it's the biggest. I mean, look, with the offensive line, I think with the injury to Gerby Lambert, we kind of have an idea of who the 5 are going to be. What we're going to talk about the offensive line, but there's questions there, but it's not who's going to start.
Sure.
And I think this is the one position group that is most impactful when you look at it and say, hey, listen, who starts is going to have a big impact on what this team looks like and what this season looks like. And so I don't know how you can come out of spring and say anything other than quarterback is still the biggest question mark in regard to twofold. Number one is who's going to start. And number two, I'm excited about what I saw from CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey on Saturday in the Blue Gold game. But playing in front of 20 to 30,000 people in the Blue Gold game is a great learning experience, but it doesn't mean you're going to go into Miami or Texas A&M or play USC or play at Arkansas and be able to perform at that level. So that's still a major question mark. I love the talent, and everything we talked about in the segment earlier was about the talent, the arm talent, the ability. There's clearly still things that we have to learn. And the question is, how quickly can one of those guys separate and win the starting job to allow him to start getting the reps necessary to get comfortable running this offense? So there's still a lot of question marks in regard to who's going to be the starter. We can all say, and it's easy to have the hot take, CJ Carr is going to be the starter. Okay. I mean, you're reacting to what you saw in the Blue Gold game. And if you were asking me who I think is going to start, that'd be my pick. But I don't think anybody can emphatically say it's over, because it's not over. I can assure you of that. It's not over. If you're someone who's like, Kenny Minchey's going to start, okay, I'm sympathetic to that argument. Kenny's done some really good things, but you don't know. It's not over. I think Steve Angeli's done. I don't think he's in this conversation anymore. That's just my opinion. I think if I were to ask Marcus Freeman that question at a press conference today, there isn't one, but if I did, he'd probably give me one of these looks like, you were in our room yesterday? Because that's not the conversation we had as a staff. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that that's just my opinion. That's my takeaway. That's my analysis of the situation. That may not be theirs. And so when I look at it, Trev, it's still a major question mark in regard to who starts. And I think some guys separated, which is encouraging, but I don't know that the staff sees it that way. And clearly they're not in a position to name a starter now, which we never expected them to be. But I still want to see how they do. How do Kenny and CJ build on how they finish the spring? With these next 3 practices, and then of course going into the summer, can they win over the locker room? I think I've heard some things about from what I've been told from my sources, no matter who starts at quarterback, there's no issues with the locker room. Yes, Steve Angeli's a beloved figure in that locker room, but there's also a lot of respect for Kenny and CJ. If they win the job, then there's going to be confidence there. That was a big thing that we had a question about, but that's all fine and dandy now. But once you get into that situation where, dude, it's your locker room now, will they still be as – because right now they're kind of sharing that responsibility with other guys. And so I think all those things are still very much question marks about the quarterback room, which in turn leaves the entire offense big picture still a question mark, because I need to know who the quarterback's going to be. And will the quarterback be decided early in fall camp because they've decided as a staff it's time, and so this guy's leading, so we're going to go with him, but not with great conviction, but you just know you need to make a decision because you got to get one of those guys ready to go? Or, and that's true for even Steve Angeli, because guys, one start in the El Paso, Texas, and coming off the bench with there wasn't enough time for Steve to necessarily think about what's going on. Whereas if he's the starter going down into Miami, that's a whole lot of different pressure than it was coming off the bench without a lot of time to think. You just got to go play. He needs more work to get ready for that moment too. If he's going to be whoever's the starter is going to need that time. But are they going to do it because they need the time? Or are they going to do it because, guys, fellas, we all know who the guy is. I want the decision to be Marcus Freeman sits in the room with the entire staff, and they're like, okay, guys, we're going to go around the room, and I want you to tell us who you think the starting quarterback is going to be. And you want to be in a situation where you go around the room and it's like this guy, this same guy, 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 same. Okay, we all see it the same way. This guy has won the job. He's earned the job. He's gone out and seized it. And we're clearly not there yet, because guys have played well, but nobody's truly separated as the one. And until that happens, it remains a question mark.
The biggest question mark that I have, or the biggest question that I have about the quarterback room, yes, obviously who the starter is going to be, but Marcus Freeman said some things in his press conference, and Bryan, it was something that you had touched on a couple of days before even the Blue Gold game. You've been saying it all offseason. Ideally, you go into fall camp with a 2-man battle. And that's when I'm curious to see if and when that takes place. Because Marcus Freeman talked about it and said, look, ideally we go into fall camp with a 2-man battle. There's just not enough reps to go around in that scenario with, say, the 1s or even the 2s. My biggest question mark is if and when that takes place. And I think we're going to start to see some things unfold as the spring starts to wind down. They still have 2 more practices left, and then the portal opens, and then they go into the summer. And so we could potentially get some questions answered over the next couple of weeks, or it will be something to where, look, all 3, the room is still intact heading into summer workouts, which you read between the lines a little bit. This is still very much a 3-man quarterback battle. And so that's something that I'm going to be interested to see what all unfolds as this offseason goes on, specifically over the next couple months. Because luckily for the Notre Dame coaching staff, fall camp doesn't start tomorrow. So you do still have different measuring tools of how to evaluate all 3 of these guys. I'm in the same camp as Bryan. Look, I already believe that it's a 2-man quarterback battle, in my opinion, based on what we've seen throughout the spring practice and what was showcased at the Blue Gold game. But there's a lot of practices in between that we didn't get to see that it could have went differently. I am not opposed to that at all, and so I'm going to be interested to see what they do moving forward. That outside of who is going to be the starter for August 31st, I'm interested to see if they take that next step in saying, okay, we've now whittled it down to 2. Start of fall camp, heading into the fall, we got 25 practices from now until when we really have to start game planning for Miami to figure out who QB1 is going to be. And I'm interested to see if they get to that level. So we'll see how it all unfolds throughout this offseason. Bryan, did you have any more questions about quarterback room? Okay.
Good. I said a lot about quarterback yesterday, and I did want to give you the freedom, Trev, before we move on. if you wanted to kind of share your opinion on what you think should happen. Sean and I talked about that yesterday.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to have a whole nother show on it.
Yeah.
Where you and I are talking about it again, where I'm regurgitating the same things I said yesterday. So I did want to give you a chance before we move on to just kind of speak your piece on where you think the quarterback battle is right now. Not what you think about what Notre Dame. I just want to hear people value your opinion. They value my opinion as well, of course, as part of just the overall conversation.
Yeah.
So I did want to get your thoughts on, where do you see the quarterback battle based on the entirety of the spring, not just because you have been at all the practices. You were at the 2 short practices. You were at the jersey scrimmage. And then, of course, you were at the blue gold game. And so I just wanted to kind of get your read on where you think things are. Do you feel like one guy separated? Do you think 2? You said 2 have. You felt 2 had. What 2 are those? And just kind of your overall feel on the where things are at the quarterback room. Not just is this a question? I just want Trevor's opinion on where things are.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes this quarterback battle so interesting is all 3 stuck to what made them in this competition in the first place. I'll kind of start with the oldest and work my way back. Steve, he's the veteran. And I've been saying it all offseason, as a lot of people have, is, his thing is he's cool, he's calm, he's collected. And for the most part, we saw that this spring. When he goes in, what you're getting from Steve. He's not going to, for the most part, put the ball in harm's way. We saw it a little bit in the blue gold game and in the jersey scrimmage. If he didn't believe that something was open, he just chucked it out of bounds. He was not going to leave it up for chance that it was going to get intercepted. Now, 2 different trains of thoughts with that. As we also saw in the blue gold game, give your guy a chance at a 50-50 ball, because you have receivers and tight ends with a skill set to where maybe it's not as much of a 50-50 ball. And that's going to be even more so the case when you have a guy like Malachi Fields on campus, and when a player like Micah Gilbert's healthy, and when Will Pauling is fully healthy. And then obviously we've seen what Jaden Greathouse can do in a one-on-one situation. If you don't believe me, go ask the Penn State defensive backs and go ask Jordan Hancock at Ohio State. Okay. Now, the thing with Steve is his processing is still a little late, because some of the reasons why some of those were throwaways is because he didn't see somebody else that came open. We've seen that before. The reason why there were checkdowns is because he didn't see something open further down the field. He's done a better job of it this spring, but he has done kind of consistently what he's done his entire time at Notre Dame. Is it's really hard for him to get off of his second read. When you combine that with his really long delivery, I think it makes it really tough for him to get throws out on time. There was a throw in the jersey scrimmage where he had Cam Williams open, and it was just a split second too late. And you compound that with his longer delivery, it was behind him. Cam had the potential to catch it. I will say that. It's not like it just never hit his hands or was nowhere close to him, but it was a bad throw. For the standard of play as for a Notre Dame quarterback, it was a bad throw. So to me, the reason why I say that it is a 2-man competition is because of those things. I think Steve is now out of it. Doesn't mean that I think he sucks. Doesn't mean that I think that, man, he should just go transfer to some FCS team and be the greatest quarterback that he ever. No, Steve can go somewhere and win a program, a lot of games. But we're in the conversation of who can lead Notre Dame back to the national championship stage, not the playoffs. With the schedule that they have, all 3 of these quarterbacks could lead this team back to the playoffs. Not going to say with ease, but it would shock me if any one of those guys couldn't. So it's a conversation of who can get Notre Dame to its highest potential, and I don't think Steve Angeli's that guy. With Kenny, again, he showed throughout spring what made him so attractive and also where the question marks still are. He still struggles with starting fast. He makes some questionable decisions at times, but when he's dealing, he is dealing. The arm talent was on full display every single time that I saw him this spring. And it was also on display at the blue gold game. Dude can put it on a rope if he needs to. He has good touch if he needs it. And he was the most dynamic with his legs. Again, not that Mike Denbrock needs that in his offense, but that is an element that Kenny Minchie brings to the table that Steve and CJ might not as much. They're all 3 mobile guys. In the jersey scrimmage, Steve Angeli had the longest run. And we saw what Kenny can do with his legs in the blue gold game. Cherry on top, nice little cool backflip after the score. Just wanted to throw that in there because that was awesome to watch, But then come the mistakes. there are times where he can still lock in on a receiver, and it can be a little late. There's times where the ball does get in harm's way. And you're going to get that a little bit with some younger players. But Kenny is going into his, redshirt sophomore season, and you want to start to see some of that kind of leave. And then with CJ, look, man, it was as advertised. He was known for his processing, and he was known for his ability to read a defense and throw guys open. There's not a throw on the football field that he can't make. Same with Kenny Minchey. Kenny Minchey has the stronger arm, like in terms of arm strength, but both quarterbacks, there's not a throw on the football field that they can't make. One of the reasons why I wish we would have seen, CJ kind of let one rip a little bit in the blue gold game, just to put that on display. Because I think there is a minority group of fans that do believe that, CJ he's accurate and he can put it where he needs to, but, I don't know if the ball goes 50 yards in the air. CJ is more than capable of pushing the ball down the field vertically. But for him, again, it is the lack of experience. Not that Kenny and Steve have an abundance of it, but we have yet to see CJ Carr take a meaningful snap, or I believe just a snap.
He played at the end of the Purdue game.
Okay.
And that was the only drive. He came in and handed the ball off.
That's right.
But yeah, so we've seen him take snaps, but he hasn't thrown a pass. And like you said, neither him nor Kenny have taken meaningful snaps.
Yep. And to some degree, I think overall that argument doesn't hold as much water as what some might think. Because look, at some point, nobody has experience. At some point you have to get your opportunity. And Notre Dame can't consistently be like, well, we're going to wait and let him groom until we think that he's old enough to have that opportunity. They got to get their feet wet at some point. Marcus Freeman talked a lot in his press conferences about how, look, you can get experience and reps in practice, but really valuable reps come in the game because that's when it matters the most. And so for me, if I had to rank them in order coming out of the spring, I'd put CJ and Kenny up there, CJ at 1, Kenny at 2. I would hear out arguments for the 1A, 1B type deal. And then I think Steve is the distant third. I do. And, the biggest thing for me at quarterback at Notre Dame, especially from a first-year starter, is consistency. And the most consistent the most consistent player this offseason for Notre Dame at quarterback that we have seen has been CJ Carr. You know what he's going to do week in and week out. Kenny is still a little bit of a question mark. It sounds like he's more consistent than what he has been in previous off seasons, but it's still that question mark of, okay, like, how can we get this guy started fast? Is he going to be on today? Is it going to be and I start hearing that, and I start to get a little bit of shades of Riley Leonard of, we got to find a way to get him in a rhythm early. We got to hope that he's on today. I think Kenny can overcome a lot more things as a thrower than what Riley Leonard could a season ago. Let me be clear. But CJ, as a first-year starter going into his redshirt freshman year, you want that level of consistency. And every single time that I've seen it, it's been consistent. So that's kind of where I view the quarterback battle right now as a whole, Brian.
Good stuff. I think the second thing, we can move on to the next thing, Trevor, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think the next thing we talk about is the receiver position still remains definitely a question mark. There are some good things we saw this spring. Jaden Greathouse was Jaden Greathouse. Jordan Faison looked healthy when he was out there. We didn't see him in the last 2 periods because he had lacrosse games. So nothing wrong. He just had a lacrosse game last Saturday and lacrosse game the day of the blue gold game. So, we saw some solid things there. Will Pauling was at 3/4 speed for most of the spring. He didn't really start to turn loose till the very end. You notice no Malachi Fields this spring. So there's still a lot of question marks. Micah Gilbert gets hurt in the first day of spring. We were hearing a lot of good things about what he was going to do this spring and what the expectations were. He gets hurt. And, Cam Williams, I thought, took advantage of that by getting a lot of good work in, showing some things. He certainly improved as a player. Still a long way to go for him. KK Smith shows some really good things, but then also just doesn't show the urgency or the functional playing strength to really be a guy that's going to go out there and play a bunch for you. He still has room. He's got to develop his game. Scrap Richardson's a really athletic kid, but he's really far away from being a guy that can help you. Jerome Bettis is not a guy that's going to really help you this year. Elijah Burris can. There's some talent there. Logan Saldate didn't take the jump from what we saw that I thought he would. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't in the other practices. Maybe he did, but that's why it remains a question if he's there. So saw some positives. I feel a little better about the receiver room now than I did when the spring started, but not by as much as I hoped I would. Just because of Micah Gilbert getting hurt, that was a big blow. And we saw guys improve, but not sort of the hopeful, okay, no brainer. Yeah, Cam Williams is going to have a break. I didn't see that from him. I saw some flashes like, okay, I think he's going to be okay, but will it be this year? Will it be next year? I don't really know right now. And then, of course, we didn't see anything from Malachi Fields this spring because he's not here. So, Trev, when I look at it, that it's going to be so different when Malachi Fields shows up. And you put him with Jaden Greathouse and some of the things I saw late from Will Pauling was like, okay, there's some juice there, but it's still very much a question mark. And I can talk right now. Basically, here's how I say, Trev. Right now, with the receiving core, we're still ending spring talking about the potential of the room, not what the room is. And as I say a million times, potential's great until you get to Saturday. And then potential's not great because you want it to be production. You want it to be present. You don't want it to be, this is what it could be sometime down the road. You want it to be, this is what it is right now. And it's really good right now. And they're not there yet.
I was hoping to have a similar conversation with the wide receivers at the end of spring, like what we had with the defensive tackles. And the defensive tackles, we said, look, if this guy kind of elevates their game, they're going to be in a pretty decent spot. And I was hoping to have that conversation with the receiving core. There are some factors that it's nobody's fault. Micah Gilbert gets hurt. That's not anybody's fault. He was a player that I was going to have my eye on this spring. He was one of my, this guy could kind of rise, especially with Malachi Fields not yet on campus. We just didn't get to see it, unfortunately. The two players that I think are the most interesting to me is KK Smith and Cam Williams. Like we've talked about before, those two guys have a skill set that not a lot of other players on that roster have. You can make the argument those are the two. Your burner, stretch the field, can take the top off of a defense guys. And give or take a few moments and some flashes, they kind of ended the spring either at the same level or just slightly above of what they entered it from what we saw, or at least from what I've seen. I don't know what Cam Williams looked like in the practices that I had.
That's fair. Okay, that's fair. Yeah. So let me just add to that, Trev. He's definitely better than what he was last spring and fall, even in the December practice for the playoffs that we got to see. He's definitely ahead of that.
Okay.
He's just not where he's at a level where you feel like definitely can help you a bunch. I think he showed enough this spring to say, like, I'm finding a way to get that kid on the field against certain looks, and I'm going to keep pushing him.
Okay.
Whereas in the spring, it was like, he's just not going to.
Gotcha.
Like, he's not going to help you with where he is right now.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough. That makes sense. So taken with a grain of salt, I didn't get to see what it was before, but the question still remains, what will his workload be? Because he's one of the higher ceiling players in the room. Can that come to fruition over the summer and the fall? KK Smith, he's having some similar problems to what he was having at the start of spring and at the end of last season. Got to beef up the strength a little bit. You got to find ways to get off and create a cushion, get off the line of scrimmage, fight through press. Those are some of the issues that he was having towards the end of last season. And he was having some of them this year. Now, again, he also showed flashes. I don't want to make it sound like, God, he's just the same player as he was when he got on campus.
You talking about KK? I would actually say that I think that's fair to say that he is. I don't know that I have seen a whole lot of like the Cam one. That's where I'm at with that one. With KK, I'm actually a little bit disappointed that he didn't make the jump. Or again, in what we saw.
Sure.
Now, in the other practices, KK might have shown that growth, might have shown that improvement, and I hope that he did. I haven't heard one way or the other. I'm just saying from what I saw, this is exactly what I saw last year before he got hurt. Potential, speed, but just not strong enough, not consistent enough. And it really just comes down to this. When you're that fast, you have to play with urgency because otherwise you're not using your speed to your potential. And that's really what's missing for KK. It's like, dude, you got to let it go, brother. You just got to take off. You just got to, use that speed. Go. Let it loose. Attack the football. Like, I thought that post route, like, if he's more aggressive attacking the football, he makes a big play in that game. He was open, and he just couldn't make that play, and that's what I'm referring to. So I think in that case, Trev, I think that you're fair in saying he hasn't really taken that step.
Gotcha. Okay. So with those are two guys for me that I think are more of the interesting conversation coming out of the spring. I'm also really going to have my eye on Elijah Burris as the offseason continues to progress. Because right now, outside of Malachi Fields, who's not on campus yet, Jaden Greathouse we know is a given. I know Jordan Faison split in his time. He has done nothing to show me that he's going to come back in the summer and into the fall camp and like digress.
I just need him to be healthy.
Yeah.
Just need to be healthy. Yeah. That's it.
Literally.
He beat out Chris Mitchell last year. Like, just be healthy. That's it. That's the only thing I need to see from him and Jaden Greathouse. Just be healthy.
Yes, sir.
I know y'all can play. Just be healthy. I'm not worried about them.
Yep. Health is the biggest thing for them. And then with Will Pauling, it is get back to being healthy and then stay there. But, we're talking about how the bottom half of this receiver rotation is still kind of up for grabs. What is that going to look like? How's Micah Gilbert going to be coming back from injury? Can Cam and or KK Smith take that next jump? Because I think now it's an interesting situation of, okay, well, now you add Elijah Burris to the mix. Could he potentially pass up one of them? I don't know. He's a true freshman, still a ways to go. But from what we've seen, he's made more flashy plays than KK or Cam. And obviously Micah, but Micah was hurt. So where does he fall into the mix? I think that's interesting. So that's something that I hope to start to see get unfolded a little bit as the offseason goes on. But at the top, it still remains, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, it's still a question mark with guys like Malachi Fields. I have no question that he's going to come into South Bend and pick up right where he left off from Virginia, if not excel a little bit more, because he will have a better passer under center, whoever it is in South Bend, than what he was dealing with at Virginia, especially in 2024. But outside of the top guys, really, Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse, and Jordan Faison, the rest of the rotation is up for grabs in my eyes. Even Will Pauling, he struggled with drops in 2024. He was hurt. So he also has some stuff to prove, even though he is a veteran in that room. So that's still my biggest question mark. I would say out of all of the position groups that we are talking about and have talked about today, wide receiver is the closest to where it was at the start of spring in terms of questions answered.
I think that's fair
in comparison to
I think that's a very fair thing to say. Yeah.
So
of a position that's not dominated by injuries, like D end is kind of where it was coming into spring for not negative reasons. It's just, we didn't see Junior and Josh in the blue gold game because there's no need to play them. There's some guys that took jumps, Cole Mullins, but we didn't see Boubacar. We don't know where his health is. Logan Thomas was out the last couple times we saw it. No, Jordan Patel. That's just a difference. That's just injured. There was nothing they were going to really do, especially since part of the thing too with the defensive ends is the one practice we saw them at, they're going against freshmen and walk-on offensive tackles. It's just impossible to evaluate what they can do. So they're where they were at the spring just because of just lack of opportunity to really see that group. This is different, to your point, Trev. This is just, we didn't see it, the type of jumps we'd hoped for.
Yep.
And then when you don't have a Malachi, you don't have, Will Pauling's, 75% at best for most of the spring. You don't have Jordan Faison the last two things we saw. It's like, it's hard to honestly look people in the eye and say, oh, dude, receiver is great right now. I think it's going to be okay once everybody gets there, but I can't tell you that with a straight face right now and say right now today, oh yeah, man, they're phenomenal there.
Yeah,
I can't. I think they're going to be pretty good once everybody gets here, but a lot of that's guys that weren't here this spring. So how can I say you answered the question about where they were before the spring to now? Because what are you going to say? Well, yeah, but once Malachi, right? We already knew that though. We knew that on March 17th. Yeah. We already knew that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's one of my favorite skits. I'm a big Brian Regan fan. I like comedians that know how to be funny without cussing. It's kind of ironic if you know me. I wish I held that same standard in my personal life. But there's a scene where he talks about going to the doctor, And he says he goes to the doctor with heartburn, and the doctor hands him a sheet, and it's got all these ways to get heartburn. And he goes, I already know this. I know how to get it. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, we already knew that. We already knew that Malachi Fields is going to add something, but it can't just be Malachi. You've got to have other people step up. And I think once we see this room whole, we're going to feel a lot better, because in the fall, we're going to see Will Pauling 100%, and having gotten a whole spring in the offense under his belt, we're going to see Jordan Faison focus on one sport. We're going to see, how this spring benefited Cam Williams. How did this spring benefit KK Smith? How did the spring benefit Logan Saltate? How did the spring benefit Elijah Burris? And so then we're going to find out a lot more in the fall. But right now, you can't look at this group and say, they were here, now they're here. Like you said, Trev, with the tackles. Secondary, they were here, now they're here. You can't say that. They were here and now they're here. That's how I would say it. They're better than they were when the spring started, but there's still definitely a question mark of, can this unit play championship football? Still a lot to prove in that regard.
Absolutely. The last position group that we're going to talk about today here on offense is the offensive line. And they are one of the bigger questions that we have, because along with quarterback, a lot of the stuff on offense kind of begins with the offensive line and the big boys up front. So when we talk about the offensive line, one, it's going to be, what is it going to look like? Because when we saw the Jersey scrimmage, to your point about the DNs looking pretty good in that, they're going up against, Bryce Young's going up against Max Anderson, and then you have, Cole Mullins, or you have Logan Thomas going up against a true freshman in Matty Augustine. And so it's just tough to gauge where they're at. Luckily and thankfully, in the blue gold game, we got to see the ones play a little bit. We got to see Anthony Knapp out there, Billy Schrouth out there, Charles Jagasaw at right guard, and then Emil Wagner at right tackle. Some things to like. Also, some things to work on. And we talked about it after the blue gold game of like, look, there's a good chance that week leading up to the blue gold game was the first time that all four of those guys were on the field together getting reps in. And so that will come. I'm not too overly concerned about it, but it is still a question mark that we have because of the lack of, one, what we got to see this spring, and two, just the overall lack of them being out on the field due to coming back from injuries. And Emil Wagner was on the pitch count because he played 1,000 snaps last year. So offensive line remains a big question for us heading into the rest of the offseason as well, Bryan.
This is a question mark, but it's not one that I'm super concerned about now, because we need to find out when Gerby Lambert's going to be back. That's a concern, right? And that's a disappointment, but it's more so, okay, I think we kind of have an idea of what the starting offensive line is going to look like. As far as who's going to be in there, what we have no clue is what's the starting offensive line going to look like when they're all five playing together. We got a small glimpse on Saturday. And there's some encouraging things. The pass pro is okay. They weren't going against Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patelho and Josh Burnham and Junior Chilamaka. The only proven regular that was out there was Bryce Young, who's in his third semester of college. He's a rising sophomore. But there were some times when some of those young DNs gave him problems. Obviously, like we talked about, Cole Mullins blowing up Jagasaw on a counter. Jagasaw also is kind of still, he tweaked his ankle the week before. I don't know if that was a factor at all or not. I have no idea. I don't know how much work we've seen Emil and Jagasaw playing beside each other. Anthony Knapp was only cleared to really do a whole lot like a week and a half before that. He looked rusty, which you'd expect him to look a little rusty when he hasn't practiced most of the spring, So there was nothing to give me any cause for concern other than just we haven't seen him do it a whole lot. So it remains a question of how good can this group be? I don't know. I saw them play 2 series together basically in the game. And really we saw 0 series of what the expected returning starting offensive line is going to be. And so yeah, it's a question mark.
I have more questions about their depth than what I do about the starting offensive line. And let me clarify what I mean. When I mean depth, I know that they have it, but it's the question of where will it be? I guess if that makes sense. With center, I have no idea. Joe Otting makes the most sense once Ashton Craig comes back to battle him for the starting center spot, or if just Ashton Craig is going to slot right back into the starting lineup, Joe Otting makes sense as the backup center. Outside of that, I think the two deep is kind of up for debate when you think about it. I mean, when Gerby Lambert comes back healthy, Joe Rudolph said he was taking snaps at left tackle before he got hurt, mixing in there. Will he be a backup to Anthony Knapp? Will he be a backup to Emil Wagner? Is he going to be fighting for a starting spot? Will Black sounds like he's going to slot in at left tackle somewhere along the depth chart, but I don't know where that could be. Maybe it'll be at right tackle. Sullivan Absher, I have no idea where they're going to put him. And honestly, at this point, it kind of feels like, depending on the week, is where he's going to be at. Either center, right guard, left guard. It also wouldn't surprise me if we tried out there for fall camp and we get to see a practice and he's just taking reps at right guard, because that young man has played all across the offensive line during his time at Notre Dame. But that is more the question for me. And it's a two-sided coin. On one side, it's kind of comforting to say, okay, we have a lot of guys that can play across the offensive line, barring somebody getting hurt. But then on the flip side, it's okay, but from a development standpoint, are they getting the necessary reps at one position long enough to where if they have to step in and play, they're going to be efficient enough at that position? And so I think that's one thing, one bigger question that I have about the O-line, more so than are the starters going to be good? Because you always have to look at that with a grain of salt for how limited they got to play together this offseason. So that's where I'm at on the O-line, man.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed that the offensive line is going to be what it is again, likely because of injury. That doesn't mean that Anthony Knapp wouldn't have won the job anyway. We just never really got to see them battle because by the time Anthony Knapp came back, Gerby got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never got to really see them kind of compete. That's disappointing. And I think it would have been better if Gerby can get back by fall camp, that's great. Because I think if Gerby is back and healthy and he's playing at a high level and Anthony Knapp beats him out, that means Anthony Knapp's really raised his level of play.
Absolutely.
Either way, it's good for you to have them compete. And we didn't get to see them do that this spring. Not directly. I mean, you get to evaluate what Gerby did and you get to evaluate Anthony Knapp did, but we didn't get to see them kind of go through a spring. And how can you really evaluate? Let's just say hypothetically that Gerby Lambert played the whole spring and looked great. And if we're talking about narratives, we all a lot of us in the chat, us included, think that the best offensive line is one where Gerby Lambert does win a job. But how fair would it be to Anthony Knapp if you're evaluating a healthy Gerby Lambert against an Anthony Knapp who's banged up because of an injury he suffered as your starter in the college football semifinals? That'd be super unfair and more confirmation bias than real analysis. So even if Gerby didn't get hurt, we didn't really get to see those two guys really compete against each other. But it got even worse when the fact that by the time Knapp gets back, Gerby goes down. And so I just wanted to see if Anthony Knapp was going to win the job at left tackle. I wanted to be because he had to go outplay Gerby Lambert, or vice versa. I didn't want Gerby Lambert to be the starter because Anthony Knapp is hurt. That doesn't tell us that he's ready to be that guy either. So that's a little disappointing, to be honest with you, when I look at this offensive line. And that's why I just think the injuries and just all those things factored into where it's hard to say that position is not still a question mark.
Yeah.
As far as a question mark, meaning we don't know what it's going to look like and all these different aspects to it, Travis. It's just really hard to say that we got any kind of good read on what the alignment, what the offense is going to be like. Just who's going to play where is still kind of a question mark. Not as much of one, but what it's going to look like and how this group of five is going to play together. Because the first game we see them with where the offensive line is Knapp, Schrouth, Craig, Jagasol, Wagner will be the first time we've seen a lineup. We've never seen, none of us have ever seen an offensive line that has Knapp, Schrouth, Craig, Jagasol, and Wagner in it at the same time. We've never seen it. Because Anthony Craig didn't play all spring, so you haven't seen it. So those are things that you look at and say, okay, I need to learn those things.
Well, all right, Bryan, let's talk a little bit about defense, man. And we do still have some questions remaining about the defensive side of the ball. And where we're going to start here is kind of what we touched on a little bit when we ended the questions answered. And it's about Chris Ash, but kind of on the different side of the coin here. And we still don't know what all the Chris Ash defense is going to entail. And a lot of those answers, look, are also going to be found out on August 31st and then on throughout the season. But some of the things that we don't know yet, are what is the personnel going to look like? What are the coverages going to look like? What's the rotation going to be? And so there are a lot of things that weren't answered this spring, and some of them I was kind of expecting to not.
Most of these, we didn't really know what the answer was going to be in its entirety this spring. So this is an understandable one. This isn't even really a criticism, Trev. This is just more of an acknowledgement of it. And I think it's even more so an acknowledgement by the way that Chris Ash decided he wanted to install this spring, which I'm actually a fan of, by the way.
Yeah.
And that is from what we were told. And there was an intel piece on the board about this a couple weeks ago. So all the board members, this won't surprise you. This won't be new. But one of the things that I was told is that Chris Ash has decided he wanted to kind of go with a slow and steady rollout of the changes he's going to make for a host of reasons. One is he wants to be able to focus on, teaching and technique and those type of things. But number two is he's still trying to evaluate what the strengths and weaknesses are of this unit. And that to me shows me a level of savvy aspect of it that not all coaches have. Like, well, how can I tell you what needs to change if I don't know where the strengths and weaknesses are? That, if you're doing that just tells me you have a way of doing things and you're going to change it no matter what. He said he wasn't going to do that. And I think that's evidence to us that he's not. He's not going to say, okay, we're just going to do it my way or the highway, and we're not going to do anything now. You got to say, look, what are we good at? What are we not good at? What are the things that I need to hold on to, and what are the areas we need to improve upon? Well, if I'm throwing 87,000 different changes and wrinkles and terminology at this group in 15 practices where half the time I don't even have a bunch of guys in there, then how do we really learn what they are or are not good at? And so I love that. I'm a big fan of that. But what that's going to do is that's going to have us get to the end of spring and say, I really don't know the full extent to what Chris Ash is going to do in regard to adjustments with his defense. So when we talk about this one, Trevor, it's just an acknowledgement of a reality. It's not a concern. It's not a cause for concern. It may be a concern. It may be a strength. We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know about what is Chris Ash going to do. And at the other aspect of it too, Trevor, is there anything really that Chris Ash could have shown us this spring that's going to make us say, no worries, they're going to be fine? No, because it really won't matter until we get to games. I don't care what they do in practice against a beat-up offensive line and not having Malachi Fields and Jeremiah Love half the time. And I care about what they're going to do when they play Miami and they play Texas A&M and Purdue and Arkansas and Boise State and so forth and so on. So I don't know that we're really going to know that answer, to be honest with you, until we get to games. But it's also, we can acknowledge that his choice to implement this way is even more so the reason why we really don't know the full extent to which he's going to adjust. We know some things. They're going to play more zone than they did last year. To what extent? I have no idea. Let's just say they were 75% man last year. If they go to 65% man, that's still a lot of man coverage.
Yep.
But are they going to go to 50% man, 40%? I have no idea. None of us know. And I don't know that Chris Ash is completely set on what that's going to be just yet. Are they going to blitz 60% of the time, 50% of the time, 40% of the time, 30% of the time? I don't know. I do know that they're going to alter how they line up the ends. A lot of different things are going to change there. So we do know some things, but a lot of this stuff, Trev, remains a major question mark. Not a major question mark. That sounds like a negative. It's just we won't really know until we get to the fall. And we're not going to fully know until we see this unit line up on Saturdays.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Simply put, it's just an unknown, not to the fault of anybody. But also the thing that I look at with some of the defensive questions that we have, some of the reasons why we didn't have it answered in spring is because of how depleted the offensive side of the ball is.
Defense for that matter, Trev. I mean, you don't have Boubacar, you don't have Batelho, you don't have Donovan Hinish for half the spring, you don't have Jalen Stroman. I mean, yeah, you don't have some of your freshmen that are going to help you play this year. It's depletion, period.
Yeah.
On top of not being tested by a full strength offense.
Mm-hmm. There are maybe there's things that they do differently in terms of schematics and personnel groupings when instead of the wide receiver group being, Scrap Richardson, Elijah Burris, and Will Pauling in there that Leonard Moore and Christian Gray are guarding, maybe it looks a little different when Malachi Fields is on the field with Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Eli Raridan and Jeremiah Love. And,
or Will Pauling as well.
Yeah. And so that could look a little different, but it does remain a question. And there is going to be some more finer detail things that we are just going to have to wait to learn until August 31st. I got asked a question at the Blue Gold game. I was like, hey, how do you think Chris Ash is going to be on games, like on the sideline, like how Al Golden was, or do you think he'll be up in the press box? Like, dude, I will be able to answer that to you at 7:32 down in Miami, because it's just, we don't know, and you can even go back and look, well, historically at Ohio State, he was this. It's like, fair enough. But at LSU, Mike Denbrock was up in the press box. And last season at Notre Dame, he was down patrolling the sidelines. So it's different. It's kind of what the team dictates and what it needs. Him being a first-year defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, I could see him being on the sidelines a little bit more, to be more engaged, and so plus the defensive staff is loaded with coaches who can be up in the press box, who understand what's going on. And so that could play a factor, but who knows? It's all stuff that we're going to find out as the season goes on. Another question mark that we do have on defense, sticking along the defensive line here, is you mentioned Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patello. We don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know what the edge rotation is going to be. We don't know what, how much improvement the pass rush is going to have. And so those are some questions, again, not to the fault of anybody, but we don't know the full extent of it. We didn't get to see Boubacar Traore. We didn't get to see Jordan Patello. We didn't get to see Josh Burnham or Junior Tuialamaka in the Blue Gold game. We didn't get to see Bryce Young, and to the surprise of nobody, he still looks like Bryce Young. And so we don't know what that's going to look like, and it's another question that we have going into the offseason, Brian.
It's going to be an important one, Trev, because I do think the things that we did see from Chris Ash are going to require that the defensive ends play at a high level. Now, in some ways, I'm encouraged by where the defensive end is right now compared to where it was, coming into the spring, because we did see Bryce take a jump, and we did see Cole Mullins playing very well. I mean, Cole had some moment. I mean, we didn't really know what he was going to do until we got to the Jersey scrimmage, because as you had mentioned in our practice reports, like, they're just going through drills. We never actually saw them like take any team type of reps. I think there was like one team walkthrough or something like that in one of the early practices. That was really it. But he did some nice things in the Jersey scrimmage, had some nice plays and flashed a little bit. And then he backs it up again in the Blue Gold game as sort of like a power edge guy. And if you want an example of what we're talking about, there was an early run on the first series of the game where they ran counter to the left. And Cole Mullins comes off the line, whacks Charles Jagasaw, and then comes off and helps make the play with Bryce Young, who had great pursuit from the backside. And you're like, now that's a darn good football play right there against a guy that has a chance to be an elite offensive lineman. And you tackle Jadarian Price in the backfield. That's probably Jadarian Price's fault, because that's kind of how it goes. Whenever the offensive line gets beat and he gets tackled for a loss, it's clearly his fault. That's kind of how it goes.
That's what I heard
with certain people. But it was a great play by Cole Mullins. So, like, okay, we were talking. I say that's the one question on the D-line we got answered this spring is there a third big end with Burnham and Bryce Young? And I think the answer to that is, yeah, potentially there could be. And it's a big-bodied guy, too, in Cole Mullins. And if Cole Mullins can give you some of that, that also gives you some flexibility to not always have to use Bryce and Josh as the big ends. You could use them in the other side as well. So, but at the end of the day, you still don't know what this unit's going to ultimately look like, because you know what Josh can do to a degree and Junior can do, but are they going to be able to elevate their games? We didn't get to see a chance to do that. They went against young players who they should have beaten the game in this Jersey scrimmage, and they did. Doesn't really tell us if they've raised their level of play. I mean, we've seen these guys beat guys from Penn State and Georgia before. I would hope that they can beat Matty Augustine as a true freshman and Max Anderson and guys like that. No disrespect to those players, but like, you expect proven veterans to be able to win those battles, and they did. We didn't get to see Josh Burnham and Junior go against Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner and Kirby Lambert and Charles Jagasaw this spring. So it remains a question mark. We haven't seen any. We don't know how healthy Boubacar Traore is going to be. We don't know how healthy Jordan Patello is going to be. So when you come out of the spring, it's still and I kind of expected this. I didn't expect this to be I think the reason why I'm a little bit more disappointed in the end position than I was coming in, or maybe where I thought I would feel, is just because of the fact that Logan Thomas got dinged up and we get a chance to see him this spring.
Yeah.
That's if he would have got a lot of those reps that I think that was a missed opportunity for him. It's not his fault. I mean, he got hurt. I don't know what you expect him to do. But that's the concern with the guy who's that light is, can he stay healthy for an entire season? He could have really used those snaps this spring, and to not see him get those was a little bit disappointing. Not a criticism of him. It's just them's the break sometimes, you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of maybe where some of my, that's disappointing feeling is, because we didn't get to see him do more of that. And we didn't see Chris Burgess this spring because he's not on campus yet. We didn't see Joe Reeve, Dominic Kulik. So there's just a lot of guys are going to be part of this rotation we just haven't had a chance to see yet. And then not getting to see Bryce Young really go against the top guys just left us with I don't really know where the defensive end position is right now. We'll find out. I'm still very optimistic, but I can't sit there and it's for the same thing we talked about earlier, Trev. It's I can't tell you in good conscience that the receiving core, I can't tell you in good conscience that they're going to be great based on what we saw in the spring. I think they have a shot to be really good because of things that we didn't see this spring. Malachi Fields and a healthy Will Pauling and Jordan Faison all the time and things like that. But if we're just evaluating what we learned in this, because what's the whole point of the show? What did we learn this spring? We didn't learn anything this spring about Boubacar Traore or Jordan Patel because they're not practicing yet. Nope. You know, we didn't learn anything about Logan Thomas positively. We didn't learn. I don't think that we learned a whole lot about Bryce Young other than he's putting in work and he's twitchier and more advanced than he was. But I need to see him now be able to do that against, a top level tackle, which we'll find out in fall camp when he starts going against Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp and hopefully Will Black and hopefully Gerby Lambert and those type of guys, and you'll feel a little bit better about it. But right now it remains a question mark.
100%. 100%. And it will look different when you start getting some of those guys back. But as of right now, it still remains a question mark. One of the last things that remains a question mark here that we had talked about, defense as a whole, is will the run defense improve? And that is an aspect of this team that all three levels will have to play a crucial part in, because we've seen at higher levels what it looks like when Notre Dame isn't able to stop the run. I think as a whole, for the most part, throughout the regular season, we talked about how Al Golden kind of weighed his, pros and cons. Hey, we're willing to give up something in the run game to make sure that we focus on the pass game. When you start playing top level talent and championship caliber talent, they can hurt you both ways, which is something that we've seen.
Saw Ohio State.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Ohio State wasn't really ripping Notre Dame up throwing the football in the first half. They ran on Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
They threw screen game to the running backs. They ran the ball, and then they put the game away with a 70-yard run. They kind of neutralized your elite defense and pass defense until the last drive of the game.
I mean, even the Penn State game, they played significantly better in the second half. But we're also talking about a game that finished 27-24, and not a single Penn State receiver logged a catch.
Right.
And so the run defense has to get better.
What were the issues that game? Right. To add to what you're saying, they ran the ball all over Notre Dame in the first half. They started to slow them down in the second half, but then Penn State had some gas runs in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You were able to shut down Penn State's run game Georgia's run game, because you just whooped their offensive line there, but there wasn't a consistency there. And you were daring them to throw the ball because they had their backup quarterback playing, and they couldn't do it. And their style does not hurt Notre Dame as much as Ohio State and Penn State. What they did was Penn State stretched Notre Dame, which has been a weakness all year. And Ohio State did a lot of, pin and pull, gap stuff, counter stuff, which again has been an issue at times. Georgia tried to run power right at them, and that's your offensive line's not that good.
Yeah, honestly. And so can Notre Dame's run defense improve? There are signs when we're talking about questions. This is one that I'm aware of, but it's not like super concerning because of some of the positives that we talked about, some of the questions that we did get answered in the first segment of the show. The D-line, specifically the interior, is getting bigger. We've seen them have success. For as depleted as the offensive line was this spring, the interior was pretty decent. honestly. I mean, I know we didn't get to see Billy Schrouth, but we did get to see a lot of the trio of, Sullivan Absher, Joe Otting, Charles Jagasaw along the interior. We saw that in the Jersey scrimmage. And the defensive tackles, for the most part, did a pretty good job clogging holes, eating up blocks, which then allowed the linebacking core, which we are very high on, scrape over and make plays, fill gaps like they needed to. We've also seen some of the safeties come down and fill and blow up run plays after, linebackers squeeze and safeties are able to come down and fill. But I got to see them do it in the game. I have to see that be effective when they play Texas A&M, who has 5 starting offensive linemen come back, and Amari Daniels, and Le'Veon Moss, and a mobile quarterback in Marcel Reed. Got to see it when it counts then, not when they're going up against, a second, third string offense. Yeah. So it is still a question.
Well, and part of the reason it's still a question for me too is I did think that the first team offense leaned on them a little bit in the blue gold game. And we saw that. And we saw guys that are regulars. I mean, look, you can't blame not having so-and-so in there when Jalen Sneed's running into the hole and basically whiffing on Jadarian Price. I mean, you can't say that when one of the big early plays of the game was Jagasaw and Emil Wagner blowing up Bright. I mean, Jagasaw and Emil Wagner blowing up Gabriel Rubio. I mean, that's your starter. I mean, we saw the tight ends kind of whoop Bryce Young pretty good on that particular play. It wasn't like you did that to your backups. Matter of fact, I thought the best D lineman on the first drive of the game for the defense was Cole Mullins.
Honestly.
So and then also, what's the emphasis that Chris Ash is going to put on this compared to where Al Golden? That's a question mark in regard to just a lack of knowledge on our part of knowing what he wants to do. It's not a question mark like based on what he did in the spring, that means I'm concerned. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, so it's like, it's okay to say like, hey, I don't know, because I haven't seen it. We need to see it. So I do think there was some evidence, however, even in the Jersey scrimmage, we said, like, we thought the young offensive line kind of started to lean on the defense a couple snaps here and there. Now, part of that's because the one thing that you can say about Joe Rudolph's offensive line this spring, even when they were getting whooped in the Jersey scrimmages, they compete their butts off. And there is some talent there. I mean, Joe Wadding's a talented kid. Sullivan Absher's a talented kid. Charles Jagasaw is a talented kid. Matty Augustine's a talented kid. Owen Streby's a talented kid. They're going to have some reps. They look good because they're talented. And they play hard. And his unit, first string, second string, third string, whenever you saw a Joe Rudolph offensive line on the field this spring, for all the concerns we have about other things, that can't be dismissed. They play hard.
Yeah.
And yes. and they were able on certain snaps to kind of lean on the defense a little bit. Not to the point where like, oh my gosh, they ran all over them, but just there's some runs here, some runs there where it's like, dude, and so I still think that run game, I don't know that the run defense getting better is something that we in any way, shape, form, or fashion had answered this spring. It didn't regress. I'm not more concerned about it now than I was in coming into the spring, which is why it remains a question mark, is we didn't see anything schematically. We didn't see anything from the players. Like, they did some good things, but I didn't see like the D tackles did some really good things this spring, but I didn't see them get out there and just consistently shut down the run game. The linebackers do still need to fit better at times. There's still some question marks there, and until those things get answered, on Saturdays it's going to remain a question mark. There was nothing that we saw that said, "Oh man, based on this, definitively they're going to be a lot better stopping the run this year." So it remains a question mark.
It does. Yep, absolutely. Did you have any other questions that, maybe minor?
Yeah. I still think that we're talking a lot about depth, but they can't play all those guys everywhere. And they can't play all those guys equally. I still think there's some question marks about who really is emerging as the one, the two at safety. What's the D tackle rotation really going to look like when we get everybody back? So I do think there's some questions there, Trev, as far as like, what's the pecking order going to be in the fall? I don't know that we saw a lot of good things from the safeties. Could you name one guy that definitively said that's your dude next to Xavier Watts? Now, I mean, Don Schuler, I wish, next to a Don Schuler. To a degree, no, they didn't, but that's partly a good thing because it's not that nobody did well. It's just a lot of guys played well.
Mm-hmm.
What's the split from Luke Talich to Jadon Blair and Jalen Stroman and Bronte Johnson? Do they say, hey, we're so good here, we've got to find some ways to get some 3 safety alignments on the field, especially with the unique nature of the safeties that you have? The one thing that Jalen Stroman I thought was best at Virginia Tech was coming downhill and playing the run. That's kind of what they used him for. They didn't have him play a whole lot of coverage. Now, I think Notre Dame's going to ask him to play more coverage, but that's the thing I know Jalen Stroman can do is come downhill and play. You've got a guy like Kennedy Urlacher that can come downhill and play. What role do they find for him? I know the coaches are high on him. What do they do with him? There's all these different things, Trev. And the other thing, too, is how does the portal impact this? We're talking about the D-tackle rotation. That assumes that everybody stays. We're talking about the linebacker rotation. We're assuming that everybody stays. Same thing with the offense. And so I'm hoping that doesn't become a problem. We talk about how good the running back room is and quarterback. I mean, that could get shaken up along with a lot of – Cal, this today, had 4 different running backs announce – actually, they're only 4 scholarship running backs all announced they're transferring. Whole room. This is disgusting. I don't see that anything like that happening in Notre Dame, but there is the possibility that guys could jump in the portal, and then how does that impact things, if at all? So there's just a lot of different questions like that still remain, Trev, when you're looking at this as a team is how healthy are certain guys going to be come the fall? How healthy is Boubacar going to be? How healthy is Jordan Patojo going to be? Is he going to play like he did last year, or are we going to see the guy from the years before? We don't know the answer to that. I'm confident, knowing this is his last chance, that we're going to see a very focused Jordan Patojo. But again, I need to see it, right? I mean, there are a lot of those questions that still remain. That say, boy, just you think you feel good about something, Trev, but I still just need to see that this group is going to be what it's going to be. And I think the pass rush is still a little bit of a question as well, Trev, because when you look at the defensive end position, if you're Chris Ash, can you confidently say today for a fact that I know that we're going to be able to rush the quarterback with 4 against top offensive lines? I don't know how you can do that because you haven't really faced a top offensive line much this spring. Yeah. And I thought for the most part, the pass pro was solid with a group that hasn't really played a whole lot together. So, but that's also, you didn't have Josh Burnham in the blue gold game. You didn't have Junior in the blue gold game. You didn't have Jordan Patel in the blue gold game. You didn't have Preston Zinner looked pretty good. That was encouraging to see. But I still think it's a question mark to be able to look at the pass rush and say, I'm looking at like from Chris Ash's standpoint, are we going to have to blitz more than I would otherwise prefer in order to get consistent pressure on the quarterback?
Sure.
I think that remains a question as well when you look at this defense.
The only other question that I have, and it is minor, and it's not a concern, it's just more genuine curiosity. This spring didn't really iron out for me, based on what we saw, who the replacement for Jack Kaiser is going to be. I feel like we're still in the same spot of talking about, look, the room is loaded. You can put anybody in there. But from the start of spring to now, from what we have seen, nobody's really like separated into like, okay, like they've kind of taken over. We've seen flashes from all of the players. Honestly, I've seen flashes from Kingston. I've seen it from Jalen Sneed. I've seen it from Osbury. So that's a little bit more of a question for me. That, and then just how they're going to be used. Similar to what you said about safety. Look, you got a loaded room. What is that pecking order going to be? What's the rotation going to look like?
Yeah. It's funny, Trev, because you were spot on. That's a question mark. We don't know. But at the end of the day, that's also one of those ones where it's like, I don't care. Like, also, you know what I mean? It's like, also, okay. It's like, who's going to play this guy or that guy? And it's like, yeah, all of them. Well, who's going to play? I don't care. I don't care. They're all going to play, and they're all really good. You know, and you know, if anything, it's kind of like, will anybody from the third group challenge to get into the second group? You know, can Preston Zinner challenge? Can Madden Faremo, like you talked a lot about Madden Faremo and how he doesn't really know what he's doing yet, but that's what these 15 practices plus all the work he got in January is being part of the team. There comes a moment, whether it's over the summer, fall camp, or sometime during the season, where that light switch goes on for Madden Faremo. And it's like,
and when it does,
he's going to play. right? I mean, the same thing for Bodie Cahoon. It's like there's going to come a time where like the light switch goes on for Bodie, and it's like, okay, we got to find a role for this kid.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing about Bodie Cahoon. You know what I'm most looking forward to at the linebacker room? I mean, I can't wait to watch the first kickoff of the season because I have a feeling we're going to see 36 just whoom, flying down the field, blown up. So I just have the feeling that we're going to see that on the first kickoff of the season. I just have a feeling Bodie Cahoon is going to. I mean, they'll probably kick it out of bounds. I mean, kicking in the end zone, but I just want to see them just let them first kickoff just come down and lay somebody out. He can run, dude.
I mean, man, just think about some of the players that are going to be on that kickoff coverage unit. I mean, it could potentially be, Bodie Cahoon, Madden Faremo, Jadon Blair, Dallas Golden, and or Mark Zachary. Preston Zinner, who knows? Like, I mean, that's just – I'd fair catch it anyways. So that's just me. But
yeah,
agree.
It's probably smart. It's probably a smart idea.
Yeah,
probably smart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, all right, folks. That is going.
I did want to say this, Trev, before we move on, because we have a mailbag next. But I do think this needs to be said. What's encouraging is a lot of these question marks that we have are still question marks from somewhat of a position of strength. Like on offense, we're questioning a position group that still has Jaden Greathouse and will be welcoming in Malachi Fields. And on the offensive line, it's like, we don't know this, we don't know that, but it's like, but we know it's going to be big and athletic and talented. We don't know about defensive end, but we know the people involved. It's just, how healthy will they be? But it's kind of like, but if they're healthy, boy, whoo, dog it. I mean, you talked about the last thing you brought up is like, who's going to start at linebacker next to Drake? What's Kingston's role going to be? Is he going to play, just the number 2 Mike and a pass rusher? Does he also play Will? Could he start at Will? Can Jaden Osbury start at Will? What kind of 3 linebacker alignments are we going to see this year? There's all these questions, but it's questions from a position of strength. It's not like, I sure hope so. This is where we were not that long ago with certain positions. I sure hope so-and-so can step up, because if not, they're in trouble. And you think about going into 2022, I really hope that Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey can step up this year at receiver, because if they don't, they're screwed. And they ended up being kind of screwed. I would argue that maybe if they would have learned how to use Braden Lindsey a little bit better that year, that they maybe would have been a little bit. But then you can also say they did use him well. The quarterbacks just didn't throw the ball to him. Yeah. But the point is there's been a lot of years where it's like, if this guy doesn't step up or if this guy doesn't play well, they're in trouble. I mean, they were in Marcus Freeman's 1 year at defensive coordinator. They were so thin at defensive end that they had to bump Myron Tungavaloa out to defensive end to start that season at defensive end. Guy that had been a 3-year really important rotation player for you at defensive tackle, you had to bump out to defensive end because you were that thin there. Think about now where we are now. And so, like, these are all positions of strength, but they're and all these things are determining none of these question marks are they going to go 9-3, 8-4 this year? Or they're like, okay, will it keep them from hosting a playoff game or possibly getting in the playoffs? I mean, some of these things could be like you're 10-2 because your quarterback and O-line doesn't play as well as you think. You're 10-2 and maybe you miss a playoff game, but like that's the floor of these question marks. Like when we talk about the floor of this team, and we said it right after the season, we did a show somewhat, well, actually might have been a little bit later after the season, but it was between the spring and the season I said, I think the floor for this team is 10-2. And a lot of these questions getting answered not as favorably as you'd like are what leads you to go 10-2. These are question marks about, okay, if they get answered a certain way, how deep into the playoffs can you go is going to be determined by how effectively the quarterback question gets answered and the receiver question gets answered and the O-line answer, the pass rush question gets answered, the run defense question gets answered. Those are all things that are going to determine whether or not this team can win a championship. That's the difference between this conversation now and when we had this conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago. Or I mean, even really the couple years ago, where it's like, boy, if this guy doesn't pan out, like where 2 years ago, you were going into fall camp saying, you want to complain about the receivers now? You were going into fall camp a couple years ago saying, if the freshmen aren't ready to play, you're effed at wide receiver. You're totally screwed at wide receiver. And because you had to play freshmen. Now it's like, how it's those same kids are now juniors. And that's the quote unquote question mark. And you're going to be getting in Malachi Field. So these are questions that come from and it just shows how much Marcus Freeman has built this program up. I mean, that's the thing that you get encouraged by. That the bar has just been raised so significantly that we're not like, if this doesn't pan out, they could really struggle this year. It's more of a like, boy, I hope they don't super disappoint us at the ultimate level and go 10-2 this year. It's more so about like how far into the playoffs they're going to go is going to be determined by how well these questions get answered. But it's not like I don't know if they're going to be good or not. And that hasn't always been the case until really recently with what Marcus Freeman has done. And so that is, I think, I think I wanted to end it that way because we just spent, looking at it, we got done, 106. We've spent the last hour and 9 minutes talking about all these question marks. It can come across as like, wow, like that's concerning. But these are question marks that are almost encouraging that this is what we're worried about. I mean, Trevor's talking about a question mark is which of these linebackers is going to start. It wasn't like, gee, I don't know if they're going to be good at linebacker. If this guy doesn't pan out, it's like, which one of these studs is going to step up and what's the rotation going to look like? That's the debate now, Trev. It's a completely different conversation than what it was just 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, even the conversation that we had about KK Smith and Cam Williams, we were having a discussion around they need to elevate their game to be like the 4 or 5 in the rotation, like to be an effective part of the offense, not be the offense. I mean, that's really encouraging. The way that I've always explained it to people, especially this past offseason, is look, big picture, it is the same questions. We have questions about the receivers. We have questions about the pass rush. We have questions about, but the frame of reference is different. It's about getting back to and winning a national championship. It's not getting to the playoffs. In 22, in 21, heck, arguably 2023, the foundation had already started to be laid, but even in 23 a little bit, the questions were, can they make it to the playoffs? Now it's, like I said before in a previous show, I was like, we had one season of Notre Dame winning back-to-back major bowl wins. Now, like, all right, man, like what can they do to make it back to the semifinals and give themselves a shot to play for a natty? It's not, gosh, like, can they make a road playoff game? And it's a really good spot to be in, man. I agree. Coming from a position of strength is a much better spot to be in.
Right.
I'll say that. I will definitely say that. Well, all right. Bryan, anything else to add?
Oh, man, go ahead and give us a little transition here, and then we'll get into the mailbag.
You got it. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We have a mailbag coming up. But before we get there, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast. And look, we've talked a lot on the show about how awesome of a community the Irish Breakdown community was. Bryan and I and Vince got to see a lot of you guys on Saturday for the Blue Gold game. Love getting out to meet new people. The best way to get involved with that community, the live shows are awesome, but the best way to do it is subscribe to the premium message boards. Take a look at that Champions Lounge. It's where all of these awesome discussions are ongoing and intel pieces that will be going up like we've talked about throughout the show. You can find all of that on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, we got a mailbag to wrap up today. And if for anybody in the live chat, this does happen to be your first mailbag. If you have a question or comment that you want Bryan and I to talk on, discuss, or answer, put a little MB in the chat next to your question or comment. That lets us know to set it aside. So either MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji. We're going to go for about an hour and get as many questions answered as we can. But I always love doing the mailbag questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to try to go for about 35 or so minutes just because I don't want to overlap too much with IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. But let's get rocking and rolling so we can get to as many of these as we can.
Let's do it. Aiden Benami, what is the best way to communicate the quarterback position? Do you tell Kenny he's a backup first and confirm he's good as a backup and then tell Steve he's third, or talk to Steve first and confirm he'll stay being the 2 or 3 and then tell Kenny?
I look, I don't care what order you do it. I just think honesty is the key. I don't think you tell Kenny something and see what his reaction is, then go lie to Steve and tell him that, no, he's the 2 in reality, because you now know that Kenny's, because that's not honest. And I would rather lose multiple kids because I was honest with them than to keep guys because I lied to them. I don't want to win that way. I've said that a bunch of times. So you're honest with them. Now, as far as the best way to communicate from an order standpoint, I think the one thing you do is I think the first guy you sit down and talk to is Steve Angeli, wherever he stands. I mean, again, we're telling you guys what we think is going on in the quarterback room. They may think Kenny's number one. They may think Steve is number one. I don't know the answer to that. But I think Steve, no matter where you view Steve in the depth chart, first, second, or third, he's the one you sit down and talk to first. There's no way you allow him to hear something that may be bad news for him from someone else. I think that's the one thing Steve Angeli has earned, is the right to be told before anybody else, face-to-face like a man, that this is where we are. Whether, again, that sounds like I'm like, okay, you're giving him bad news, he's number 3. They may not view it that way. That's what we think. But that may not be how Gino Guidugli or Mike Denbrock or Marcus Freeman see it. But it doesn't matter which way they see it. He deserves to be told whatever first. And then I'd bring in Kenny next, and then I'd bring in CJ last, just because I do it in an order of how long they've been in the program. That's how I would do it. That's how I'd answer that question.
Absolutely. All 3 quarterbacks need to know where they stand after the spring is over. Absolutely. Aiden Benami, I don't know why, but I was very happy to see that Notre Dame is going with 2 normal big end type of defensive ends rather than the Viper scheme, etc. Will we see a big difference there or not too much?
I think it's a misrepresentation of what I've said about the change at defensive end, or not. I don't mean that as like you're doing something wrong, Aiden. I think it's just more of a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. What I'm referring to is more of the body type that they're recruiting into the program. You're not seeing the hybrid converted linebackers. You're not looking for the junior Tuilamakas and those type of guys as much anymore. You're looking for more of a true edge player. That doesn't mean that they're not going to have look, they just signed got a commit from Ebenezer Ewatade. Why? He's a Viper. He's a long, twitchy, athletic, weak side pass rusher. So you're still going to have, but he's more of a true edge, is what I'm talking about. They're trying to go with more true ends, not the Viper type that's a hybrid guy that you're going to drop into coverage more. That also could mean that you have 2 Rodney Dunham types playing defensive end. That could happen, but you're not going to have 2. I'm trying to think of a pure end, like a big end. You're not going to have 2 Nana Asafa-Mensahs playing a defensive end. You could say you could have 2 Javonte Jean-Baptiste, but he kind of is that what you're looking for, that guy that could drop into. I mean, you are kind of looking for that type of player at both spots. That's where the difference is. You're still going to have them drop into coverage at times. You're still going to do different things with them. And you're also going to see, as we saw in the spring, I'm curious if this is just a look they gave for the spring to kind of give Miami something to think about, or if this is a real look. But we saw some odd fronts where you had like Armel Mukam playing end with 2 other interior guys, and then a 3rd linebacker walked up on the edge. That's kind of that old school Viper thing that we think of the hybrid player, but that's more of a 3rd linebacker. You could do that with Kingston or Madden Frame or Jalen Sneed in that type of look, and you're getting some more odd fronts. So I think those are some wrinkles, but I don't think that you're looking at it from a standpoint of saying, hey, when you're going to have 2 true defensive ends, you're not going to have 2 275-pound run stuffing defensive ends on the edge. So I don't think that's at all what I'm saying. You're just going to have 2 natural edge players that have some interchangeableness. If someone's going tempo, you don't have to switch sides because you're teaching them is like, you're the Viper and you're the big end and this is what you do. And then there's just going to be a lot more interchangeableness. If anything, that could also mean that you're more looking for the athletic guy on the big end position as well, not just like, I think everybody's looking at this like, okay, this is going to really impact Viper. It certainly impacts Viper, but it also going to impact the end position as well. And so I just think that's more of an accurate representation of kind of what I'm referring to. And that answers DJ question too. He says, piggyback off Iden's question, how do the Viper coverage responsibilities get covered? Would it be a coincidence? Would it coincide with zone versus man? Well, if you're playing a lot of man, you don't necessarily need to worry about the Viper in coverage. That's going to be he'll do what all DNs are taught to do in those situations where, if they're in a free release, you don't have a backer behind you, you see that running back swing, you peel. A lot of teams do that, even teams with two true defensive ends. If you're the boundary player, you're going to peel. You're going to see things where linebackers are going to maybe take more of those type of responsibilities as opposed to the Viper, but you're going to still see situations where a Viper's opening up and running with a running back on a wheel route, like Isaiah Foskey did against Syracuse a couple years ago. So you're still going to see some of that stuff. And then when you're in man, or zone, then you don't necessarily need your ends to drop as much unless you're dropping 8. But if you're dropping 8, you're most likely in a third and long situation, and you don't have a true 4-man defensive line on the field anyway. So we didn't see the Vipers drop a ton last year. Even Al Golden didn't use them as much in that last year. Still did, for sure. I mean, especially with Junior Talamaka, because you're taking advantage of that type of player. So you're still going to see that option. I just think you're not going to see it as much. And that's why I don't think they're going to go to this like pure zone defensive scheme that maybe some people think that they are based on what they did this spring.
Fair enough. Zach Martin, who in the current 2 deep will push a projected starter for more snaps at each level of the defense?
Who in the current 2 deep will push a projected starter? Well, I think Will Pauling potentially. I mean, I think when there's 3 guys going for one spot at linebacker, that's technically someone from the 2 deep battling. Whether you think it's, Jalen Snead is the veteran, is the assumed starter right now, and then it's Jaden Osbury and Kingston battling him in whatever order you want to say that. I think that's fair. I mean, if we're assuming that Jalen Stroman or Luke Talich is the perceived starter at safety opposite of Don Schuler, then obviously they're being tested by Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson and potentially Kennedy Urlacher, guys like that. So I think those are the ones that are most obvious. I would have thrown Gerby Lambert in there if not for the injury. And so it's kind of hard to look at that. Those are really the only ones where I see like a number 2 battling a number 1, because I don't know that there's a 1 and a 2 at quarterback right now. So I don't really count that one in the conversation. Those would be ones, Zach, that I look at and say those are, I think, guys that are pushing. Another one could be D-tackle, depending on who you perceive to be the starting 2. Is it a lot of people are just assuming it's Onye and Rubio. I don't know that that's a given that they're going to start. I think we've seen some of that because Donovan Heinisch hasn't been practicing a lot this spring because of how much he played and some little minor stuff. But if you see Donovan as a starter with Gabriel, then you could say both of those guys are kind of being challenged for a spot in the top group by Jason Onye and by Jared Dawson and guys like that. So I think D-tackle is one, but I don't really care as much about that one because I don't really care who starts. It's going to be a rotation.
Yeah.
It's like, who's going to start between Josh Burnham and Bryce Young? I don't care. They're both going to play, and they're both going to play a lot. So it doesn't really matter who takes the first snap. It matters to me who's on there, and if whoever's on there, are they making plays, and who's on there in the final, the really big moments. I care a lot more about that than I care. There's so many positions now, Trevor, where I just don't care about starters as much as I used to. D-lines like that. Linebacker right now, to a degree, it's a unique at Notre Dame. I don't think that's true at most places. You've got your starters. But Notre Dame, it's like, I don't care who starts at will. If Jalen C starts at will, fine. It doesn't mean that Jaden Osbury and Kingston aren't playing. I don't care if Drake Bowen's the starter at Mike. It doesn't mean that Kingston's never going to play a snap or a meaningful down. I just don't care as much about that as I used to.
I think more of the conversation is about the who in the 3 deep will push the 2 deep. Honestly, I mean, you think about like what I said about Elijah Burris. If he continues to progress at the rate that he is, does he have a chance to push a KK Smith or a Cam Williams? You look at linebacker. What if that light comes on for Madden Framo? Is he now fighting to get into the 2 deep? You look at the secondary. Cree Thomas has had a great spring. Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary aren't even on campus yet. What happens if they get here and they're as advertised? What if Jadon Blair takes that next step? Are we going to be talking to him or talking about him in the same light that we are a Luke Talich and a Jalen Stroman? Who knows? And so I think the conversation about the 3 deep to the 2 deep is a little bit more interesting, to your point, Brian, about, starters, especially when we're talking about like D-line, linebacker to a degree. They're all going to play. You go back through Pro Football Focus and look at how many snaps, a lot of these guys played. I mean, it's crazy. And so they're all get in to a degree, but, say the same thing about the running back room. What is it going to look like with Kedron and Aeneas? Where do you put Jabron Payne in the mix? That's more interesting to me than who's going to just be the first person out there when the game kicks off.
Because sometimes the starter may be determined by your pairings.
Mm-hmm.
Like at D tackle, you may say, "Hey, look, I really like the combination of Dawson and Heinisch together, and then Onye and Rubio together. So, okay, these two may be quote unquote starters, but it's more so they're quote unquote starters because you've got pairings. You want those guys playing together, and so you pair them together. But in certain situations, you may have the second group in there in certain settings because they more fit that situation."
Mm-hmm.
You may see that at receiver at times, running backs like that. Like you could say, like, well, you could argue that Aeneas Williams was a starter last year, to use Coach Dylan McCullough's terminology of that, because when they were in third down, it didn't matter the circumstance. He was in the game. He was a starter in that package.
Yeah,
and so I just think you look at it a lot differently now. If Devontae Smith doesn't start the game off at nickel because they're in some 3-down package because the other team comes out in 12 or 13 personnel, does that mean Devontae Smith isn't a starter? Of course he is. It's just sometimes that package is going to lead to somebody else being on the field. That's kind of how I look at that.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, RJ Oben started the games. By the end of the season, Bryce Young was playing more snaps than RJ Oben was.
Yeah.
So agreed. Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate that, man. How many schools do you think would love to have this quarterback competition? And I'm happy that we don't have the Tennessee issue at quarterback. And ironically, they're volunteers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. A lot.
Yeah.
A lot of schools would love to have Notre Dame's quarterback problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously Texas wouldn't, because that means they don't have Arch. They would much rather have Arch. I think Oregon's comfortable with their quarterback room. I mean, there's some schools that are comfortable because they have their starter. But I think there's a lot of people that would love to be in a situation where you're like, seriously, Steve Angeli might be your third? Really? Blake Hebert has no chance of being in the top 3 if everybody stays? Like, boy, you guys are loaded. I mean, like, Clemson doesn't want to be in Notre Dame's shoes until Cade Klubnik goes down. Yeah. Then they're wishing they had a Kenny or a CJ or a Steve to come off the bench, because I like Chris Vizina, but I don't know that I'd say he's better than Notre Dame's 2 young guys. So I think most teams that don't have an established top-level starter would love to be in that. And I promise you right now, Tennessee would love to be in a situation where they have Notre Dame's three quarterbacks. I think. Oh, yeah. But I also think Tennessee's going to be okay. I mean, George McIntyre's a guy that I like a lot, and he'll battle. They'll go into the portal and get somebody, and then who that be, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people would love to be in this situation.
Mm-hmm. DJ with a question. I consider Jeremiah Love the best running back in the country, but why do so many people overlook Price? This is the best backfield in the country.
You're spot on the first part and the last part. Your question is that center part. Why do so many people overlook Jadarian Price, Trev? And I think there's a couple reasons for it. Number one is when they were both competing last year for that like 1A, 1B spot, people naturally did what they always do, and they got into the Team Jeremiah camp and the Team Jadarian camp instead of Team Notre Dame camp. And so there's just people that whenever Jeremiah Love's not on the field, it's like, how do you not have Jeremiah Love on the field? Because he's 200 pounds and can't play 75 snaps a game and carry the ball 300 times because Notre Dame's coaches aren't idiots. So, I can't believe they put Jadarian Price in. Oh, he's going for 60? Okay, all right, I guess I'm okay with that. But I still want to see Jeremiah. Jeremiah would have done it 2 seconds faster than – man, that's just kind of how it goes, man. Instead of saying, like, dude, they're loaded. It doesn't matter who's on the field. They're going to be a threat to score. Of course, Jeremiah is your one and Jadarian's your next guy. But, like, why would you not want to have that 2-man group? I think the other part of it, too, is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the running backs were used last year.
Yeah.
Jadarian Price is inherently going to have more negatives last year than Jeremiah was, because Jeremiah was almost strictly a inside zone duo runner. They would occasionally use him on counters, but on Jadarian, they used him a lot more on counters.
Mm-hmm.
And that created more negatives, because if you miss a block on a counter, someone's running free. You look at the play, there's been several times that happened. Now, that doesn't mean that every time it's the offensive line's fault. There's been plenty of times where I'm like, Jadarian, you can't bounce that, man. You got to trust your blocking, stick with your blocking. But when you may only get, 4 or 5 carries, you're kind of like, well, man, I'm trying to go do something with my 4 or 5 carries. And I think Jadarian's got to learn to say, dude, if all you get's 4 carries and you get 4 yards a carry because you were doing what you're supposed to do and trust the offensive line. And Mac, I'd rather you do that than get a couple minuses and then you didn't do anything. Stick with it, and then when those holes open and those bounces are organically happen, then you can go do something special. So I just think it's that, DJ. We're very tribal. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day on Twitter, and it was not about sports, but we're very tribal by nature. You know, we like to put ourselves in these camps, whether they're based on, you know, political views or your sports fandom or your race or your gender or where you're from geographically. There's all these different things that we like to put ourselves in these camps. And then now in the way we have such polarized way of thinking about everything now that even within your own tribe, if I'm team this guy, then I hate that guy. Like 2 years ago, like people on the right loved Ron DeSantis until the minute he decided he wanted to challenge Donald Trump for the presidency. Now he's a sellout, a traitor. I hate him, even though he's the same guy he was as governor 2 years ago. But because he's still in your tribe, but now I hate him. And that happens on the left too. And it's really shallow thinking, but we tend to do that a lot. And we just kind of get into these things. We're like, I'm team Jeremiah, and I don't want anybody on the field except for Jeremiah Love. And if the coaches put anybody but Jeremiah Love on the field or give anybody else the ball, then that's terrible. And so then now I start to pick apart everything that Jadarian Price does because I don't want to, you know, it's like, dude, he's your guy. Like, he's your guy. It's great, though, that you also have that guy in there, too, that can, you know, because then what happens against USC? Jeremiah's killing USC. Then he gets hurt. And then they bring in Jadarian. And what did Jadarian do? He killed USC. You know, I mean, that's where you want to be. Imagine if they didn't have a number 2 like that against USC in the second half of that game. You know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we go with that. And that's the frustration.
For sure.
Yeah. Jason Smith, same way last year I love Chad. Now, exactly.
Yeah.
And people say, well, I didn't like Trump before. Okay, fine. You do the same crap on the left. That's just kind of how we are. You know, and it's frustrating, but it's also you understand it in human nature. It's like, okay, I get it. You know, we just tend to follow our packs. Like, I won't even get into that. But yeah, Trev, you and I have had some political conversations. Like, isn't it really funny that this side of the aisle now supports this, where like 10 years ago they supported that, and now the other side who 10 years ago hated that now support. It's just like, you know, it's wild stuff, man. But I think a lot of that is what we're seeing here. It's just like, or I'm team Aeneas. I like Aeneas more coming out of high school. So it's like all these people that just want to do nothing but tear down Drake Bowen because they're Kingston Villiamasa fans. Well, why can't you be a fan of both? Why do you got to tear down one guy because I thought this guy was this coming out of high school and blah, blah, blah. It's shallow. It's shallow thinking. Like, that guy's really good and that guy's really good.
Yeah, man.
They're both really good. And thank God Notre Dame's got both of them. Because here's the thing. If Jadarian wasn't playing for Notre Dame, he'd be playing against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Don't want that.
Yeah. I mean, look, dude, it just comes down to everybody wants other people to support them. That's why they separate themselves into these camps. Like, people need to be told that somebody agrees with them. And not a lot of people will be like, well, who do you want, Jeremiah or Jadarian? It's like, I want both of them. Yeah. Notre Dame doesn't have the season they had last year if they don't have both of them.
Right.
It's like, well, which one's better? It's like, I don't care. They're both like, who it literally impacts me.
But why does it matter? I mean, I don't know that anybody that doesn't think Jeremiah Love's the best running back in football that's a Notre Dame fan or the best running back on the team, but it doesn't mean that I then got to go pick apart every mistake that Jadarian Price makes. Or somehow try to dismiss what he does.
Yep.
Well, I had this one guy. He's no longer on the part of the board. I made sure that I took care of that. But he's like, did you know that only 31 on Jadarian Price, 31% or was it something like something about like X number of his yards came on X number of carries, and it was like 31% of his carries. Like, were like. And I'm like, yeah, but the rate for Jeremiah Love was only 34%. So he was only slightly better in that area, but you're savaging Jadarian Price for that as if like he has no business to be on the field. And it's just like, you know, people hear what they want to hear and they're going to focus on what they want to focus on. And they'll take data and fit it into the narrative they already have, as opposed to letting their narrative or their belief be impacted by the data. And I think that we see that a lot with the running back. And it's true at,
man.
Like the Anthony Knapp's another one, right? Where like I can't criticize Anthony Knapp or otherwise I'm an Anthony Knapp hater. But then when I praise Anthony Knapp, it's like the people who are legitimately just don't like, it's like he's either the worst offensive lineman on the roster, should barely be, or he's the greatest thing ever. And you guys are nuts. And I don't know why you're a hater on Anthony Knapp. Like, or you're unnecessarily negative on Anthony Knapp. I literally have said he was their best run blocker for most of the year. But yeah, sure. Okay. I'm super negative on Anthony Knapp. Okay. Genius. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, we can't have these rational conversations because people just tend to go to extremes now. And that's kind of sadly where we are with the running back. It was like that with Logan Diggs and Audric. Oh, I'm glad Logan Diggs transferred. Why? What are you, nuts? Like, well, I like Audric better. So did the Notre Dame coaches. That's why he got more, he got more opportunities. Why wouldn't you want both of them? It's
because that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a little crazy.
Slightly.
Yeah. And I don't know that most fans are this way. I think most fans of the team don't care.
Yeah.
What we're referring to are the people that engage in the conversation. And that's also part of it too, Trevor, is because I think we tend to think we're more polarized than we actually are because the only people speaking about it are the people that do jump into those extreme camps. I think that factors into it as well. And that takes the debate in certain directions that I think we would both rather not go. And a lot of people in the chat would rather not go.
Ronnie Reeves. Speaking of Jadarian Price. From Ronnie Reeves, do you think that Jadarian Price will have the production to go pro after the season?
I hope so. And I hope it's because of his production and how good he is, not because there's an injury.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, if Jadarian Price goes out there and rushes for, let's say, 800 yards and averages 6.5 yards a carry and has the success he had last year, he could transfer somewhere for a fifth year or come back to Notre Dame for another year and be the guy at Notre Dame. When Jeremiah Love goes pro, he could certainly do that. But I'm like, you'd be kind of like sitting there with like 1,600 yards rushing the last 2 years. You'd have 15 to 18 touchdowns. Hopefully you can improve a little bit in the pass game. Like, I think that's kind of pretty good production to go to the NFL. I don't know that coming back for a fifth year and getting all that extra work is going to then vault him up to the first or second round. I mean, I think he's going to kind of settle into that spot and be there. So I could certainly see that situation this season. Could see him having enough production then to do that type of thing.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if they go deep enough, it's not last year. I said, there's no way you're going to have 2,000 yard backs. No way. Because you had Riley Leonard. I think it's more of a possibility this year if they go deep enough that you could end up with two guys over 1,000 yards or at least two over 900. I mean, Notre Dame almost did that 2 years ago when Audric was over 900 and I think Logan finished with like 822 or something like that. So I certainly could see that. Certainly see that. A lot
Zach
of
Martin
questions. I like this.
I know. Zach Martin, I know it's not a perfect comp, but do you think Kedron has more upside than Audric Estime?
I do. Yeah, I think he's more sudden and he's more explosive than Audric was. He's got to show me he's got Audric's feel. In college, I think he did in high school. I think Kedron was a better running back in high school than Audric was. I think he's a more explosive athlete than Audric was. But Audric just knew how to find holes and make plays, and he was a pretty good player. I do think Kedron has more upside than Audric, yes. And look, Kedron was more productive than Audric was as a freshman as well. Audric, I think, had like 7 carries for 60-something yards as a freshman, and most of that came in a game against, I think, Georgia Tech, where Kedron rushed for over 100 yards last year on 21 carries. So he was used more than Audric was as a freshman too. I don't think he'll be used as much as Audric was in year 2, just because it's a much more loaded backfield. But yes, I do think Audric has more upside than Kedron does than Audric, which is saying something because I liked Audric Estime a lot.
Oh yeah. Audric also had some fumbling issues throughout his career at Notre Dame, and I haven't seen anything from Kedron that makes me think that he could.
Although he did put the ball in the ground in the blue gold game.
He did.
But I thought that was a really good play by the defense, though. I put this helmet right on the football, it looked like to me.
Yeah, I was about to say, you can go ask Trevor Etienne how hard it is to hold on to the football when Adon Schuler puts his helmet on your forearm.
Facts. Absolute facts.
PJC 1122 was 1992 the last time a non-Marcus Freeman team had a running back room this deep.
Oh, man. I'm looking up 93. I know they had Lee Becton in 93, and he was pretty good. I think they had Randy Kinder on that team too. Yeah, Ray Zellers, Mark Edwards, Robert Farmer. 93 running back room was pretty loaded also. Lee Becton was one of my favorite all-time backs. So I should get Lee Becton on the show. What do you think, Trev? Talk about 93, talk about Notre Dame. It'd be awesome. I think we should do that. Or at least try and do that. But I loved watching Lee Becton as a kid. His dead leg was so much fun to watch, man. That movie would make just that. He'd get him. Oh, he was so good against Florida State. Anyway, sorry, I'm sidetracking. It's potentially, I mean, look, if before everybody got hurt, the 2015 room was pretty talented. I mean, you had Torian Folston and you had CJ Prosise and Josh Adams and Dexter Williams. You know, the 2017 room was pretty good. Josh Adams and Dexter Williams, Tony Jones. I don't think any of them had the upside of the current room. I mean, I think you could argue that Jadarian Price might start on a couple of those teams. You know what I mean? And boy, I mean, it's in there. There was a year. What year was it? I thought there was a year where I mean, you had Ryan. I think was it 2001, where you had Ryan Grant and Julius Jones both. 2000 was it 02? There was a year where you had. Nope. Yeah, it was 2000. There was a year where you had like Ryan Grant and Julius Jones. I thought both playing well together. No, it looks like Ryan Grant and Julius Jones were on the same team for a year, but Ryan Grant wasn't playing a ton. But you had them at least on the roster together. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of looking for something that compares, but none of them just had the depth of this group and the explosiveness of the group. So I think PJC, it's probably fair to say I wanted to just kind of think through it instead of automatically just going there. Like, oh, of course. But yeah, it's really hard for me to really find a year that where it was deeper than this. I mean, you can maybe argue 2 years ago when you had Audric, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Jabron Payne all in the same team. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good room. But yeah, I think this room is better. Now they got to go prove it. We need to see Kedron play, in a meaningful snap and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, when your sixth running back is Nolan James as a true freshman, come on, dude, like it's ridiculous.
Aiden Benami, how much better is Bubba Frazier than last year's wide receiver who we let go / decommitted from Ohio and went to Missouri, I think.
Or yeah.
Okay, I got you. Or smaller wide receivers Notre Dame has gotten recently.
Oh, way better than Sean Terry. I mean, he's just Sean Terry. The big question I had on him is I didn't think he was all that fast. He was elusive and caught the ball well. He's a good route runner, but he was small and not fast. And I didn't know how that was going to really translate to a place like Notre Dame. Bubba Frazier can fly. He's significantly faster than Sean Terry. Overall, they're kind of similar. I think Bubba's stronger. I think Bubba's more dynamic. He's more explosive and he's even more of a natural receiver, does more with the ball in his hands, but they're cut from the same cloth. It's just one's better at just kind of everything than the other one is, and definitely faster. But I think the comparison's fair as far as how you'd use them. I just think Bubba's definitely better. I forgot about that one. Yeah, that's a good one.
Sly Fox, 110404. On a scale of 1 to 10, if recruiting stays in an uptick, how confident are you that Notre Dame can land a top 5 class for 2026?
On my rankings, I'm probably like about an 8 right now. There's still some positions that I need to see them close on here over the next couple months, but I'm pretty confident that I'll think this is a top 5 caliber class when it's all said and done. Nationally, recruiting, they're going to drop guys. That's my favorite part of Gregory Patrick's dad's little rant on the clown that works for the Michigan site at On 3. He's like, now I'm going to sit back and enjoy you dropping my son's ranking. I was like, facts. I mean, like, You're going to see it. That's why I track all these guys where they were when they commit. I've started doing that last year. I started tracking where the Notre Dame kids were when they how they change in the process, and I got that this year as well. So, yeah, you're going to see it. You're going to see it.
Smart.
So that's going to make it harder for them to be in the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mike Patterson, how do you feel about the place kicking situation with the kicking? With the kick stating he is kicker stating he is reworking his kicking.
I don't understand why you do that. You brought a kid in based on what he's done. Why are you messing with it? I don't get that. But Marty Biaggi knows more about kicking than I do, so there's only so much I can say about it. But I'll just say this: I've only seen him kick three times, and 2 of them were really ugly. Jersey scrimmage, he just horribly missed a 28-yard field goal, and then we saw him kick a 50-yarder that barely got to the end zone on Saturday. It's like, wow, okay. I'm very concerned about it. Very concerned about it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Andre Tonsel, what is your big expectation for the transfer portal nationwide?
I mean, it's simple, Andre. It's going to be chaos.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. USMA 87, what's the bigger answer you want? Denbrock's offensive adaptations or Ash's overall defensive scheme with the players he has?
Denbrock's offensive adaptations. Yeah, I just think defensively they're at the point now where we've said in the past that defense is more about the Jimmies and the Joes, and offense is more about the scheme and all that. Notre Dame's Jimmies and Joes are as good as anybody's now.
Yeah.
For the most part. So, look, guys, the question with Chris Ash is he gonna be able to have a top 5 defense? It's not, oh crap, they fell to 35th. I'm not concerned about that. I'm not. I don't see that. Like when he went to Arkansas, they had a terrible defense, but they were terrible the year before. He just didn't make it a whole lot better. And when he went to Texas in 2020, they didn't have an offseason to install his defense because there was no offseason because of COVID.
Yep.
And they were terrible the year before. Went to Ohio State, he inherited a pretty good defense, and they stayed pretty freaking good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's like the question is, if there is a drop off, how much? But it won't be like, oh my gosh, are we back to the Brian Van Gorder era? That's not what's going on here. So as long as Denbrock does what I think he's capable of, I think this is going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, I said this when Chris Ash got hired. I mean, he's just got to drive the bus. He doesn't have to build one. I mean, barring him telling the players to do the wrong thing, I think the defense is going to be okay.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
Agree.
Denbrock's offensive adaptations.
Agree.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, is there a better hockey movie than Slapshot?
Yeah, there's like a bunch of them. I mean, pick the first 2 Mighty Ducks, and we're not even getting in A Miracle.
I was just about to say.
So, yeah, there's been, and I don't even like hockey, and there's been several hockey movies better than that. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very overrated movie. Very overrated movie. But I also, maybe because I don't understand hockey, and a lot of that movie was about hockey, but I don't understand hockey, and I loved Miracle. So, yeah.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, will Rodney Dunham see significant playing time during his freshman year?
It's a little too early for that, Salty, and he had an injury late in his junior year. I need to see how he comes back from that. I mean, I just want to see him finish his senior year first, but I'll say this. He has the talent where that's possible. It's too early to say, but he's definitely got the talent to be able to come in and earn playing time. Like, I'd say he's not as good as Bryce Young was as a senior, but he's a little ahead of where Bryce Young was as junior. If he makes the same jump that Bryce Young did as a senior, then yes, he's going to be in a position to come in and play as a freshman. The difference between that and now between Bryce's situation and his is Bryce, there was no other Bryce when Bryce showed up at Notre Dame. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit different. But if he makes steady growth and continues to improve on what he's been, I certainly think he's a kid that's capable of coming in and helping you as a freshman. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a couple more I want to get to here before we get out of here. Okay, here we go. This is the one I wanted.
Salty Virginia Peanuts, has spring practice convinced you that the offense will have a much more active passing component with more deep shots this year?
Yes. I mean, even in the Jersey scrimmage, we saw them trying to drop back and throw the ball down the field. They just didn't have a lot of time for it, just because of the offensive line issues we talked about. But there's certainly a lot more deep shots on Saturday. I mean, the first play that CJ threw was not meant to be a deep ball. I think they were trying to hit the under screen. They played it well, and he threw it deep. But the next slot fade he hit to Jack Larson was meant to be a deep ball. Kenny's post was meant to be a deep ball. His slot fade was meant to be a deep ball. Steve threw 2 deep balls. They were certainly more aggressive throwing the ball down the field, and they have been really all spring. They've worked on a lot of those downfield routes this spring. So I think that's a very fair, don't take too much out of spring. Well, they're working on it for a reason. They're working on it because they want it to be more of a component of what they're doing next year.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick here from Mark Avalone, when does Notre Dame need to be at 105 player limit, and how do they sit now, including those not yet on campus? Mark, I don't know that answer is there yet because we're still waiting on the judge's ruling. And one of the things that the judge pushed back on, she brought up this 105 cap. She's not sure she even likes that, but she definitely doesn't like the fact that you immediately go to it, which is going to require you to cut a lot of players. The NCAA is only doing that because they don't have to pay people.
Yeah,
that's the only reason why they're doing it. So she's talked about maybe grandfathering in players that are already on the team, so that way you're not having to cut players. So that part's going to be interesting. And she's talking about maybe getting into a gradual reduction in numbers is kind of where she's coming from on that. So I don't know that that's official yet, that they have to definitely get down to 105. If I'm incorrect on that, some of you can put that in. But my understanding is that that it's not definitive yet because it's all built on the House settlement. And the House settlement hasn't been approved yet because it's currently in litigation with the judge. To figure out just what will be accepted, what kind of compromises both sides will have to make, some of that kind of stuff. And I agree with you, Zach, that gradual would absolutely be the best. You should not be forced to cut a player on your football team. Absolutely should not have to do that. And then this will be we'll get 2 more.
ICURN with Irish Luck. I thought Bodie had potential to have a Luke Kuechly type of athleticism. If he can diagnose like Luke, that is a nasty player.
Yeah, I agree. He's talented. And if it wasn't for how loaded they are of the older players, we'd be talking a lot more about Bodie Cahoon. If it wasn't for the fact that they've got Drake and Kingston and Madden and Jaden and Jalen and all those guys. I mean, we there's other years in the past where we would be way more fired up about him. Salty, there's a lot of your questions we can't get to because I want to get this last one in before we go, so we're not overlapping with Sean and the guys tonight on Ivy Nation Sports Talk, but I did want to get to this one here before we go.
Is there a scenario from Jason Smith? Is there a scenario where they don't think Steve wins the starting job, but also sees value in having Steve be the number 2, even if he's number 3 in line for the starting job?
Jason, that's a great question. I think the only way that they view that is if they are afraid that putting him number 2, or but that they're worried about the other number 2 leaving. I don't like, well, Steve's better to be the number 2. No, in this scenario, my ideal is that Steve is the number 3, because if CJ starts and Kenny's the number 2, if something happens to CJ, either A, he doesn't play well, or B, he gets hurt, I want Kenny going into the game, not Steve, or vice versa. If Kenny's the starter and he doesn't play well or gets hurt, I want to have CJ to put in the game, not Steve. So I think the value would be there is if you're worried about losing one of those other 2 guys, then you don't also want to lose Steve. So you tell Steve he's number 2. I don't know that that's the most honest thing to do, but I could see value in that. Or you tell him he's number 2 and you tell the other guy's number 2 and explain why because of experience. I personally would not want to do that. If the pecking order is CJ and Kenny or Kenny and CJ, that's what I want the pecking order to be, because I have faith in each one of those guys to be able to take this team on a longer run should the other guy not perform well in his starts and you've got to make a change, or that guy gets hurt, which has happened a lot at Notre Dame. I'd rather go to one of those guys than Steve for the same reasons we've talked about why those 2 guys should be starting over him in the first place. The ceiling is higher with those guys as quarterback. My hope is that all 3 of them come back. I don't know how likely that is, but that's my hope. And they all come back with the right attitudes. Is kind of where I'm at on that one, Jason. That's my ideal. But that's my hope. But yeah, I'd want to. Trev, last thing, you agree? Would you or would you rather put Steve at 2?
To me, it actually kind of depends, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. but I know we're going to talk about quarterbacks later in the offseason. I'll leave you with this little thing before we talk about it more throughout the offseason. It depends for me who the starting quarterback is. I'll say that. And because I do think Steve in some capacity can provide value for this team. But like I said earlier, I don't think it's his QB1. So with that being said, Bryan, I think good to go on the mailbag.
Yeah, we'll be at 1:00 tomorrow, Trev. Go ahead and take us. Hey, right now, Sean is getting ready to get started over on IB Nation Sports Talk. So head on over there, folks. And Sean is going to get rocking and rolling. Sean waited a little bit to allow us to finish. We appreciate that. So head over there. IB Nation Sports Talk's getting ready to get started. I think it's Sean and Jesse tonight. I think is who's the duo tonight. Definitely check that out. But before you do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star. Well, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you listen to. But as always, make sure you support us at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You are missing out if you are not part of that premium community. Check it out, boards.irishbreakdown.com, monthly, annual, booster club, all that good stuff. It explains it all at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy IB Nation Sports Talk. We'll see you again tomorrow at 1:00 for the next edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast.